Okay, welcome back from lunch, everyone. I'd like to start this afternoon's session. First item on our agenda this afternoon is a discussion regarding monkfish and dogfish joint framework to reduce the bycatch of Atlantic sturgeon. There is some new information that before we go to the presentation, which was prepared by Carson with council staff, I'm going to turn to Mike Pentney with the regional office to provide us that update. And so after Mike gives his update, we'll go to Carson for her presentation, and then we'll see where we are from there. So Mike, it's all yours.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate being given the opportunity to update the council and stakeholders on some late breaking news that I believe is pertinent to this action. So you recall that the reason the council is entertaining this framework action is a result of the 2021 batched biological opinion that the agency conducted on basically all of our fisheries for the most part. And it looked at a variety of species, including sturgeon and right whales. And then specifically in that action, one of the terms and conditions, if you will, of that biological opinion and remaining consistent with it was for a joint action, that development of an action plan that would look at ways to reduce bycatch of sturgeon in gillnet fisheries in particular, and that led to the council's initiating this action. So in every biological opinion, once we've determined that the stock is not in jeopardy as a result of the action, we establish an incidental take statement. That's a number that is authorized take in the fisheries in these cases. And as long as the take of the endangered species remains below that number and the other terms and conditions and reasonable and prudent measures have been implemented, then we maintain that biological opinion. And then there's a number of different factors that could trigger a reinitiation of the consultation and a requirement for us to do a new biological opinion. One of those conditions is if the incidental take statement is exceeded. And so unfortunately, given where we are with this framework adjustment, which was based on the old BIOP, we recently received information, as we do every so often, on the estimated take of sturgeon in the gillnet and trawl fisheries. And in the case of gillnet fishery, the latest information indicates that we have exceeded the incidental take statement that was established in the prior biological opinion. So that will prompt us to reinitiate the consultation for at least the gillnet fishery for sturgeon, which opens up the door in terms of potentially new reasonable prudent measures. Theoretically, although hopefully we're not going down this road, theoretically though, it's even possible we could end up in a jeopardy opinion, which would mean there's reasonable prudent alternatives that we would have to take to avoid jeopardy. I think it's important context for the council to understand before it engages in this discussion about the framework adjustment, that these two actions are likely going to be working in parallel, that being continued development of this framework action to reduce sturgeon bycatch in these fisheries, while we also work on reinitiating the consultation and preparing a new biological opinion. This is very late breaking information. I just found out about it at the end of last week, beginning of this week. And it's preliminary in the sense that there's a lot more analysis that needs to go on before we fully understand the distribution of the take. In other words, how much of the take was in federal waters versus state waters, how much was in the gillnet fishery in large mesh gillnet or medium or smaller or gillnet mesh gillnets, dogfish versus monkfish. So there's a lot more analysis that needs to take place before we fully understand what led to the increase in take. And then of course, that analysis is going to drive what should be the appropriate responses to that. So I didn't want to derail Carson's presentation, but I did feel it was important for the council to have that as context as she goes through her presentation, which unfortunately was prepared without the benefit of this late breaking news. And then hopefully once we hear her presentation, we can kind of come back and talk about next steps in light of what I've just relayed to the council just now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, appreciate that, Mike. Thanks for updating the council on that. I'll ask Carson, do you think it would be beneficial to the members of the council at this to hear your presentation, Carson, and then we'll open the floor for discussion, or do you want to have, do you think it would be better to have questions directed to Mike at this point before you present?
I think it might be helpful to go ahead and give the presentation so people know where we are with action development and how that might mesh with where the ITS and the new BIOP initiation is.
Okay. Yeah, and one of the questions as you're presenting and as Mike gave us the update, I think we need to be thinking about, and I might ask Mike, you directly, or Carson, you know, how does this and you may have said it, Mike, I was talking with Chris for a second, but how does this coordinate with the development of this framework action? You know, potential pause, potential hold, do we keep working on it? You know, so keep that in the back of your mind as we listen to Carson, and that'll certainly be something I'd like to discuss in order for planning purposes. So Carson, with that said, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead and get started. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. So as mentioned, this is a joint action with the New England Fishery Management Council. So I'm the Mid-Atlantic Council staff on the action, and I'm lead on all protected resources issues. And then I'm working with Robin Freedy and Jenny Couture from the New England staff. So as Mr. Pentney said, this presentation was prepared before these new developments. So just keep that in mind as we move through the development so far. So just getting into the meeting objectives and the outline. The council has discussed this action a few times, but today is framework meeting 1. So first I'll review the action background and the draft alternatives that were originally developed by the FMAT and PDT. And that was in April. And then I'll review some advisory panel feedback. So that was the joint Monkfish and Dogfish advisory panels. And they gave feedback on the draft alternatives in May. And then the joint Dogfish and Monkfish committee recommendations came about at their May meeting, and I'll review those. They provided recommendations on the range of alternatives. And then lastly, I will review the staff recommendation, which includes some enforcement considerations and then some data analysis that was done after the committee meeting. So the objectives for today are to approve the range of alternatives to be considered for reducing bycatch of Atlantic sturgeon in the monkfish and spiny dogfish gillnet fisheries. And then I would also like to discuss the next steps. So this slide shows the action timeline. As I already noted, the FMAT and PDT met, as well as the joint AP and joint committee. So framework meeting 1 for both councils is highlighted in yellow. That's today for us, and then late June for the New England Council. And then after the range of alternatives is approved, the FMAT and PDT will analyze the range of alternatives and develop that final action document. So there will also be a presentation to the ASMFC at their summer meeting on the range of alternatives. And they also have a member on the FMAT PDT. And then in late October, the goal is to have the AP and committee review all the analysis and recommend preferred alternatives in preparation for final action for the councils at their December meetings. So this would allow for rulemaking and implementation by 2024, which was the requirement under the ESA and biological opinion. And then if the councils disagree on the range of alternatives, we'll likely need to adjust the timeline and maybe add meetings in the summer or fall. So I'll briefly touch on the reasons that the joint action was initiated, although we did hear a little bit of that already from Mr. Pentney. So in 2021, NIMS issued a biological opinion that authorized several FMPs. This BIOP concluded that Atlantic sturgeon bycatch must be reduced in federal large mesh gillnet fisheries by 2024, and it defined large mesh as greater than or equal to 7 inches. And in response to the biological opinion, the Atlantic Sturgeon Bycatch Working Group was formed by NIMFS, and that had federal and state staff on it. And this working group produced an action plan that recommended a council process be used to meet that needed reduction. The action plan also gave some recommendations on potential measures to be included in the action. So these were modifications to gear, reductions in soak time, and then focused time area measures such as closures or restrictions in the identified hotspot areas. So based on the action plan recommendations and the need for reduction by 2024, the councils agreed to joint Dogfish and Monkfish action given those fisheries' contribution to bycatch and their joint management. So the action plan outlines specific hotspot areas of dense interactions between Atlantic sturgeon and the gillnet fishery. And this is based on observer data from 2012 to 2020, or 2015 to 2020. And the map on the left shows the Gulf of Maine and southern New England. And then the map on the right shows New Jersey to Virginia. So the more pink and red areas have the densest sturgeon and gillnet interactions. As you can see, there are some interactions in the Gulf of Maine and southern New England. But the most dense hotspots are off of New Jersey and the Delmarva Peninsula in the map on the right, as well as a somewhat dense interaction off of Virginia. So in general, there are seasonal trends within these hotspots. There's a peak in interactions in the spring closer inshore, and that's thought to be in both state and federal waters, and then a peak in the winter for a little further offshore in federal waters. So one of the tools to mitigate sturgeon bycatch and gillnets is low-profile gear. So research has been done on low-profile gear in the monkfish fishery and has been shown to reduce sturgeon bycatch in the New Jersey area. And so this slide shows the technical specifications of low-profile gear that this was outlined in the action plan and derived from the different studies that have been done. And then it's important to note that this low-profile gear has not been tested in New England waters for the monkfish fishery and has also not been tested in the dogfish fishery at all yet. So the 2021 biological opinion doesn't specify a specific % reduction of bycatch that needs to occur. So in this case, the ESA regulations require actions that are necessary or appropriate to minimize impacts of incidental takes of sturgeon. So measures must be developed that minimize impacts in large mesh gillnet fisheries in federal waters. However, the ESA regulations also specify that measures must involve only a minor change that does not alter the basic design, location, scope, duration, or timing of the federal large mesh gillnet fisheries considered. So ultimately, a reasonable range of alternatives will balance minimizing sturgeon bycatch as mandated in the BOEM, while not significantly altering the spiny dogfish or monkfish fisheries. So when the FMAT and PDT met, they discussed potential measures to bring to the AP and committee for further development. So I'll outline those initial alternatives and then describe the input from the AP and the committee. So the initial alternatives had proposed measures applying to entire statistical areas to help ensure the measures can be enforced and to help prevent effort and sturgeon interactions from shifting around within the same statistical area. So stat areas that had hotspots are listed on this slide and also shown in the map. So the map also shows a dark blue line at 3 miles offshore. It's a little bit hard to see, but that shows the state versus federal waters boundary. So the hotspots are occurring within state and federal waters. So this slide outlines the initial draft alternatives for monkfish. The options A through D under alternative 2 address the New Jersey hotspot areas. So in New Jersey, the hotspots for trips targeting monkfish were December and May, based on observer data. And then the first 3 options for New Jersey are low-profile gear requirements during the months of high bycatch, as well as an option for year-round low-profile gear. There's also an option for a soak time restriction of 48 hours in May. And then in southern New England, which is options E and F, there are soak time restriction options for May and June based on observer data. So the FMAT PDT didn't include gear modifications in southern New England since that gear had not been tested in that area yet. So this table shows the proportion of Atlantic sturgeon takes by month and statistical area based on observed monkfish trips from 2015 to 2022. So the months and statistical areas that contributed 10 to 100% of annual takes are shaded on a color gradient from green to red, red being higher. And looking at southern New England in that first column, the highest takes were in May and June, which provided the basis for those alternatives. And for New Jersey stat areas overall, the most takes occurred in May and December. So these are the dogfish initial alternatives that are organized similarly to the monkfish ones. So for dogfish, we don't have the low profile net gear modification option. So for the New Jersey hotspot area, there are soak time restrictions for November through December, as well as April. And this is based on when observed takes were occurring in this hotspot, specifically for targeted dogfish. And then for the Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia or southern mid-Atlantic area hotspots, there are soak time restrictions from December through January as well as March. So for both regions, there are two sub-options for A through D of selecting either no overnight soaks or a maximum of 24-hour soak times. So the dogfish fishery tends to have shorter soak times than the monkfish fishery. However, there may be different needs based on regions, as we heard from the AP. And once again, these are the draft alternatives based on suggestions from the action plan. So this table shows the proportion of Atlantic sturgeon takes by month and stat area based on observed spiny dogfish trips. And for the New Jersey stat areas for dogfish, in those first three columns, April, November, and December were the highest. And then in the southern mid-Atlantic stat areas, December, January, and March had the highest takes relative to other months. So that was the basis for those timings of the restrictions. So after the draft alternatives were developed, the dogfish and monkfish APs met jointly to provide feedback, and we had high attendance and participation. So we had 11 monkfish advisors and 8 dogfish advisors. And starting with monkfish, in the New Jersey hotspot area, advisors felt that measures should apply only inshore within 3 to 6 miles. And then in the spring specifically, given that sturgeon are more near shore. So that would mean changing options B and D to apply more inshore versus the entire stat area. And then advisors at the meeting preferred no measures on low profile gillnet gear. They wanted to focus on a shorter closure or a soak time restriction of 48 to 72 hours with a preference for 72 hours. And they noted that they don't prefer measures by stat area, given that those are too large. And then in regards to the southern New England stat area, advisors felt that the options for southern New England should be removed from the action, given that the lower interactions, the lower sturgeon interactions compared to further south. And then they also had some overarching comments that were not region specific. So they felt that we need better data and science regarding sturgeon and monkfish assessments and more information on state versus federal sturgeon interactions. They generally felt the interactions were a state waters issue and the majority is happening there. And then overall, they noted the decline in gillnet effort. So there could be a decline in sturgeon interactions expected. So for the dogfish AP, some of the comments that we heard first related to the New Jersey area. Some advisors said that no overnight soak times, which is sub-option 1, seemed reasonable for some fishermen, given that most of them are day fishing. This was different for the Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia area, where there was a preference for 48 to 72 hour soak times. So this was a recommendation to add new options for 48 and 72 hour soak duration. And they noted that it's not viable to have no overnight soak time restrictions for this area. And then they also had some overarching comments similar to the Monkfish AP. They recommended considering smaller areas than by stat area for spring for New Jersey and the Delaware, Maryland, Virginia area. Focus only on the hotspots. And then advisors were also unclear if measures would apply to only greater than or equal to 7-inch mesh, or if measures are being considered for smaller mesh sizes as well. They also noted that there is the need for better data and science once again, and overall, there is an overall effort in gillnet dogfish fishery. And there was also a decline in dogfish quotas. So once again, expecting more further decrease in effort. So the day after the AP met, the Dogfish and Monkfish Committee met jointly to discuss and recommend a range of alternatives for the councils. So 10 Monkfish Committee members and 10 Dogfish Committee members were in attendance. There was some initial discussion and overarching questions before getting into the range of alternatives. So committee members asked for clarification on whether this action needs to address measures for gillnet mesh sizes smaller than 7 inches. And at the committee meeting, Garfo staff responded that based on the biological opinion definition of large mesh, there's not a requirement to reduce bycatch in mesh less than 7 inches, but there are interactions in smaller mesh in the dogfish fishery. And so there's a mismatch between the biological opinion focusing on large mesh defined as greater than or equal to 7-inch mesh, and then the action plan, which focuses on all sturgeon bycatch in the gillnet fishery, including in the dogfish fishery, which is less than 7 inches. So based on the dogfish mesh issue and some AP comments, committee members felt it would be helpful to see observer data by mesh size and state versus federal waters. They also noted that in the southern New England stat area, there are less dense interactions than some of the other hotspots and wondered whether it needed to be included. And Garfo responded that bycatch needs to be reduced overall. So if major hotspots such as New Jersey are addressed, then it may be reasonable to not include southern New England. They also discussed that federal permit holders are held to federal measures and requirements even when they're fishing in state waters. And then some committee members had some concerns over the low profile gear comments from advisors and wondered whether this was a viable option to be implemented. So getting into the discussion of the range of alternatives, the committee first discussed the dogfish alternatives. So committee members discussed that the dogfish fishery generally uses 5 to 6 inch mesh. So the full range of mesh sizes for the dogfish fishery would need to be included in the action to address sturgeon bycatch. And then a committee member added that if measures were only applied to mesh sizes greater than or equal to 7 inches, the measures would likely not apply to the dogfish fishery, especially in the southern hotspots. So another committee member voiced confusion over why dogfish is even under consideration in this action, given the BIOPS definition of large mesh as 7 inches or greater. And so Garfo reiterated that the BIOP requires addressing large mesh, 7 inches or greater, so the committee and councils have the discretion on whether to include smaller mesh sizes. And some committee members had concern that down the line, not addressing bycatch in the dogfish fishery may backfire if there's a decision from NIMS that not enough bycatch reduction was achieved. So ultimately, there were 4 dogfish committee consensus statements. The first one is related to the mesh size issue. So the committee recommended that the FMAT PDT develop and analyze alternatives for dogfish under 2 options. 1, applying to mesh size 7 inches or greater only, and 2, apply to mesh size 5 inch and greater to the extent possible, separating by mesh size category. So basically option 1 would address the specific mesh defined in the BIOP, and option 2 would better capture the dogfish fishery. The committee agreed with the advisors in recommending that alternatives be added that focus more narrowly on the hotspot areas in addition to the stat area alternatives. So they discussed multiple ways to create those smaller areas, and they were unsure of the best way to do that based on enforcement and compliance. So because of this, they recommended 2 different ways of drawing smaller areas around the hotspots and noted that enforcement input was needed. So the second consensus statement was to include in the range of alternatives for dogfish for area-based measures 3 options. 1, by statistical area group. So number 1 is what we already had included in the FMAP PDT. And then 2, by 10-minute square, approximating these nearshore areas. And then straight line, 3, a straight line that approximates shoreline. So kind of a polygon that approximates 6 to 9 miles from shore. And then the committee noted that the hotspots include state and federal waters. So this should be 0 to 6 or 0 to 9 miles offshore instead of only in federal waters. And federal permit holders would then be held to these restrictions in both state and federal waters. And there's also the intent that the commission would implement those same areas in their complementary spiny dogfish plan. So they are involved in the FMAP PDT, as I mentioned. They're following the issue, and they've indicated that they intend to follow suit. So the committee also agreed with advisors' recommendation for longer soak time options. So dogfish consensus statement 3 is to add options for dogfish soak time limits 48 hours and 72 hours. And then the final dogfish consensus statement was to add alternatives for dogfish time area closures. So the initial alternatives didn't have any closures proposed. So they wanted these closures considered in 1-week intervals up to 4 weeks for each of the 3 area-based options that were listed in consensus 2. And part of the reasoning for this is that there were concerns raised over the enforceability of soak times, and it was acknowledged that shorter closures might also be preferable to a longer soak time restriction. So for monkfish, the committee discussed the more sparse interactions in southern New England. They noted that time area closures may be more than a minor change, and the committee considered removing southern New England measures, but ultimately left these in the range of alternatives for consideration. And the first monkfish consensus statement was the same one we saw previously for dogfish, which is to add options for smaller areas to encompass hotspots. So adding in area-based measures by 10-minute square or a straight line approximating the shore. So similar again to dogfish, the committee also recommended adding options for monkfish for soak time limits of 72 hours, as well as a consensus statement adding alternatives for monkfish for time area closures in 1-week intervals up to 4 weeks. And so there was also a joint monkfish and dogfish consensus statement, which was to recommend to the councils that the enforcement committees provide input on the enforceability of the draft alternatives, specifically the use of soak time limits and the development of more refined areas beyond statistical area. So given the timeline of this action and the goal of having a reasonable range of alternatives to analyze after the June council meetings, staff reached out to the Coast Guard and OLE representatives from both councils for feedback on the enforceability of some of the options. So I wanted to thank Lieutenant Commander Matt Cayley and OLE liaison Caleb Gilbert. Both of them were really helpful over the past 2 weeks in getting us some responses on enforceability. So we heard from Coast Guard that soak times are not really feasible to enforce on the water without some type of electronic monitoring or shoreside efforts or technological advances. And in terms of enforcement areas, having distinct coordinates and clearly defined mesh sizes that the regulation applies to will help it be more enforceable. And then in terms of closures, it's helpful to make sure that no short windows of openings are created, because that can lead to safety issues where people are fishing in poor conditions in order to fish that open window. So to make sure that any closures proposed aren't right up against some other closures or leave a small gap. And then for the Office of Law Enforcement, Caleb Gilbert spoke with other enforcement officers and they provided some feedback here. So they noted that soak times are most likely unenforceable, especially in fisheries with limited BMS use. And it may be possible to have soak time restrictions for daylight hours only. So adding in a provision that says sunrise to sunset only in a specific location or time. And so related to that, a daylight hours only option would not really work in the monkfish fishery, given the longer soak times needed in that fishery. And then in terms of the two types of smaller areas that the committee had recommended, a single polygon with straight lines approximating the shore would be preferable to areas drawn by 10-minute squares. So with 10-minute squares, it would likely require multiple conjoined squares, creating an area with more than 4 sides, which is harder to enforce than a polygon that's approximating the shoreline. And so in response to the committee request, staff were also able to take a deeper look at the sturgeon takes by mesh size based on observer data. So that's on this slide. And then also the mesh sizes used in the dogfish fishery in general was analyzed based on BTR data, and that's shown on the next slide. So this first table is the number of sturgeon takes on trips targeting dogfish from 2015 to 2022. So the first column is mesh sizes from 5 to 7 inch mesh, and then the second column is sturgeon takes in the dogfish fishery using mesh sizes of 7 inches or greater. So as you can see, 98% of the sturgeon takes occurred in mesh sizes 5 to 7 inches. This is likely due to the fact that the fishery in general uses those mesh sizes, as I'll get into on the next slide. But this demonstrates that applying an action to the dogfish fishery, but specifying that alternatives would only apply to mesh sizes of 7 inches or greater may not make sense to reduce sturgeon bycatch. And so this graph shows spiny dogfish landings on the y-axis based on BTR data and different mesh size bins, which are shown on the x-axis. So the 5 to 7 inch mesh range is the dominant mesh size used, shown by those two large bars. And so dogfish trips here were defined as trips where spiny dogfish made up at least 40% of the total landings and at least 1,000 pounds of dogfish were landed. So staff took a closer look at this by state landed, and the 11 to 12 or greater mesh sizes shown on the far right were primarily trips landed in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. So these trips may have been from the monkfish fishery or other fisheries on trips where a lot of dogfish ended up being caught. And then based on observer data, there haven't been sturgeon takes on dogfish targeted trips in statistical areas that far north. So lastly, I'll get into the joint New England and Mid-Atlantic staff recommendation. And as a reminder, the BIOP and action plan required that sturgeon bycatch be reduced by 2024. So because of the tight timeline, staff recommend the removal of alternatives that were problematic for enforcement. So this will allow for the FMAP PDT to focus on the more implementable alternatives for the analysis and for final action. And then the alternatives recommended for removal are soak time restrictions of 24 hours and above. Multi-day soak times were not deemed to be enforceable with the current conditions in these fisheries. And then the 10-minute square method to surround hotspot areas is recommended for removal. This method was less preferred by enforcement than the straight line approximating shore method. And both methods had the same goal of encompassing a hotspot while not regulating an entire stat area. And then lastly, staff recommend that councils either remove dogfish from the framework action because it does not fit the BIOP criteria of 7 inches or greater mesh, or apply the dogfish alternatives to mesh sizes of 5 inches or greater instead of 7 inches or greater to accurately capture the dogfish fishery. So the committee didn't have the mesh size analysis in front of them when they included analyzing dogfish alternatives to only apply to 7 inches or greater. But based on this analysis, that would not capture the dogfish fishery or necessarily reduce sturgeon takes in the fishery. And then just some further considerations about dogfish. So if the councils did choose to remove dogfish, the councils could still address sturgeon bycatch in this fishery on a less prescriptive timeline than the BIOP requirement. And kind of decoupling from that timeline would allow for further research, such as the use of EFPs to test low-profile nets in the dogfish fishery, which hasn't been done yet. And then there has been some pursuit of the development of using data loggers for soak time restrictions. And then this would also allow for clarity on the impacts of the Atlantic Large Whale Take Reduction Plan proposed rule. So this rule is expected to apply to federal gillnet fisheries, including the dogfish fishery. And depending on the content of the rule, requirements may reduce sturgeon interactions as well as reducing risk to whales. And then lastly, staff recommend inviting OLE and Coast Guard expertise to an FMAT PDT meeting as alternatives are developed and analyzed. So this staff recommendation is meant to replace the committee recommendation of the joint New England and Mid-Atlantic Law Enforcement Committee meeting. And the rationale of this is that we have already received some answers from enforcement to many of the committee questions. So there may be less need to coordinate the logistics of a joint meeting of 2 more committees, and then continuing to check in with OLE and Coast Guard as alternatives develop will be helpful. So with that, today's main goal is to approve the range of alternatives for this action. New England is scheduled to do the same thing at their June 27th through 29th meeting. So whatever we do today, we hope also gets achieved at the next New England meeting. And so some of those main questions were whether to include dogfish, whether to remove soak time and 10-minute square alternatives based on enforcement feedback. And then in terms of next steps, should we move forward with a law enforcement joint committee meeting or invite enforcement expertise to an FMAT PDT meeting to address enforcement concerns? So that's all I have, but if we do discuss approval of range of alternatives, I have kind of the staff recommendations for the 2 FMPs up here. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Carson. This is a little complicated. Obviously, there are 2 councils, 2 FMPs involved between 2 councils managed jointly. Each council has a primary role on the opposing species side. So we've got monkfish and dogfish, each primarily managed under each of the different councils. Joint committees, and there's a lot of moving parts here with how this is going to come together. And as I mentioned earlier, I think before we get to questions, just keep in the back of your mind, the first decision point that Carson is advising us or recommending that we approve range of alternatives. And I guess in my mind, since Mike's opening statements, first question is, I don't want to move forward with a range of alternatives if those range of alternatives aren't necessarily going to address the issue based on the update. So we first have to determine whether or not we want to move forward and continue working with the alternatives presented, or is this a time to take a pause and see what comes of the information that was presented by the regional office before we take it further action. So just keep that in the back of your mind. But at this point, since Mike and Carson both provided this information, I'd like to offer the opportunity for members of the council to ask any questions that they might have, either clarifying questions or process questions. Peter Hughes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess that's the crux of the question. Is it a pause, or do we continue development to coincide with information that we get from as it comes out from a new BIOP, and just continue to develop at a much slower pace than we are currently developing? I can't see us approving a range of alternatives today when maybe none of those alternatives would really be applicable to the fishery now, based on the most recent information we heard from Mike. The New England Council is set to meet and have a similar meeting in 2 weeks, last week of June. And maybe NOAA and NIMS will have additional information for us that they can help with that guidance. But I don't know where that puts us today. Is it a pause, or does it continue at a much slower pace as we get information from a new BIOP?
Yeah, that is the decision point. I think we need to get some clarity on at this point. From what I heard, these range of alternatives have been developed in a timeline. Is that correct, Carson? That was it was a prescriptive timeline based on the BIOP. And now if a new BIOP is being prepared, how that timeline corresponds with any further action would be something that I would just have questions about. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, I think a specific timeline and, a specific charge based on certain analyses that now, may change under the new BIOP analysis.
Chris Savage?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. And Mike, you might have mentioned this when you gave us the latest information on the exceeding the take statement. But are we still bound to the 2024 deadline of implementing management measures based on the 2021 biological opinion?
Mike?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chris, and it's relevant to this discussion and the suggestion of whether we pause or how we handle this. Until we complete a new BIOP, the only way the fisheries have coverage is if the old BIOP remains in force. So even though we've exceeded the ITS and we need to reinitiate the consultation and create and develop a new BIOP, the old BIOP remains in force in order to provide the fishery continuing coverage under the ESA. And that BIOP does require an action to reduce bycatch by 2024. That being said, I think there is a couple different ways that the council could go. But certainly I would advise against just a straight out stop on this framework adjustment pending completion of a new BIOP, because I think that would raise questions about whether the old BIOP is being followed and the fishery should continue to have coverage.
So you mentioned that you had a couple options that the council, were you going to go through those? Oh, okay. Chris, you want to come back?
Yeah, actually, the other options might help, but I guess my follow-up question then is, and that's what I thought, and I appreciate that. If we paused or didn't look like we're going to meet measures by 2024, it sounds like then the service would be bound to put in measures through ESA instead of through the framework process in order to basically meet the requirements of the 2021 biological opinion. So I mean, I'll pause there because you said there may be some other options, but just kind of thinking on the surface, that's kind of, I guess, what we're facing right now.
Yeah, those are great questions, Chris. I also am thinking about New England's reaction to the new information as well. At this point in time, we're in line with one another as far as moving forward with these actions, but I don't know. It's hard to know. You don't know until they get the same information we do and make decisions based on that as well. So I don't know, Mike, did you have anything in addition you wanted to get into on options for the council at this time?
Yeah, I mean, this is where ESA and Magnuson get really tricky. And when we do a biological opinion, we're doing it on a specific action, right? So what is the proposed action in the case of this case, of this? And typically, these sorts of biological opinions that are just sort of happen, like the 2021 BIOP, wasn't the result of a specific action that the councils took, a new amendment, a new fishery management plan, something like that. So the proposed action was the status quo, effectively. But what we could do is we could do a biological opinion written on a new action, the proposed action being, for example, the results of this framework adjustment. And then we would be analyzing the expected results of this framework adjustment and the impacts to the species, sturgeon, and assuming that the action was expected to have beneficial, impacts, then we would adjust everything accordingly, and that would be the proposed action. However, to do that, that would basically require the councils to accelerate this action, the opposite of what we're more, probably more likely thinking about. And the risk there is, if you accelerate this action, you constrain the number of alternatives and you come up with a proposed action, and just hypothetically, you come up with a proposed action for a specific time area closure for monkfish, large mesh gill nets. And then we go through the analysis of the BIOP and we decide, oh, actually, what led to the significant increase in take was a change in the interactions between the dogfish fishery and sturgeon. And so there's a mismatch, right? Then the council's proposed action doesn't help at all, and we're back to square one. So while I wanted to make sure everybody is clear, like the councils could accelerate this, and that would be the proposed action on which we'd consult. I think it's my own opinion, a better approach is to continue working, continue to make progress on this. I think there's some opportunities to refine some of the alternatives as the advisors suggested, particularly the time area closure aspects rather than just the statistical areas. But while we continue to do the analysis that we need to do to understand what changed, and what I mean by that is the original BIOP that established the ITS was based on data from 2011 to 2015, that 5-year period. The data that we're reacting to today is 2016 to 2021, excluding 2020 due to lack of observer coverage. So a completely different 5-year period. So it's entirely possible that looking at the most recent 5 years, we will identify some changes in the distribution of fishing effort and sturgeon that could highlight differences in terms of the mesh size being used that indicate that we're responsible for some of these takes, as well as some, although unlikely, completely different areas given the nature of the species and the fisheries. But certainly distribution of inshore state waters versus offshore, the mesh sizes that are at play. I expect all of that that we will be able to shine more light on those distinctions and help better understand what happened in the most recent 5 years that led to the significantly higher estimated sturgeon take. And so I would think that if we can work in parallel with the councils on the framework adjustment and be sharing information as it's available as we can share it, then that would inform sort of the development of the framework adjustment throughout the rest of the year. And so then what the councils would end up with is something that fits very nicely given the latest information that would work in parallel with our new biological opinion. We still need to work through some of the technical details on how that would work, and I think we have some conversations that we need to have internally with our general counsel and our protected resources staff that will be working on this. But that's sort of my initial take on how the councils can continue to make progress, which would satisfy the 2021 BIOP, while recognizing that the outcome of that framework should be informed by the most recent data and the analysis that we'll be conducting.
Okay, I see a few hands. I'm going to go to Eric Reed, Dan Farnham, who are online, and then I'll come back to the table for Michelle and Adam. So go ahead, Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Cisneros, and thank you, Mr. Penny. So I don't see how we can pause. There's no way. We have to move this ahead. Whether it means we need to be more restrictive, more proactive, I think that's probably what it means. It could be just the unfortunate incident that there is more sturgeon in the areas that we've been catching them now, and if we move ahead with fooling with our range of alternatives, know that we're going to have to do something. I think that's a smart move. So, and I guess what I really want to know is, do we know what the distinct population segment or segments we're talking about at this point? Because if we do, that would certainly help focus efforts. Does anybody know that yet?
Mike?
Seeing dots in my, many people are typing is what my chat box is saying. The current estimate does not break it apart by DPS, but that would be something that we would be looking into. So stay tuned.
Okay. How long do I have to stay tuned, Mike? Are we going to have, what are we going to get between now and the New England meeting in, what is it, 3 weeks?
All right. I don't expect us to have anything different between now and 3 weeks from now, just given the timeline and the other work that's going on. But sort of long term, as we figure out our plan and approach for this new biological opinion, we have to consult with John Hare. His staff are critical pieces of doing this analysis and helping us better understand what was going on in the fisheries, helping us to apportion between state and federal waters and by mesh size. And this is also hot off the press that I haven't even had a chance to discuss any of this with John Hare yet. So there's a lot of work that we have to do internally to try to get some clarifications and clarity on a path forward. Maybe we'll have some of that, Eric, by the June New England Council meeting, but we won't have any hard data or any specific information to share. I don't expect.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Well, that being said, I guess my next question is to Mr. Cisneros. On slide 5, that's the heat map. How long would it take to get that more accurate than having dogfish caught on the Garden State Parkway?
I think that's
sturgeon.
something.
Actually, they're sturgeon. They're not dogfish. Sorry.
I think that's something that we could try to work on for, I mean, it's something we planned on trying to get more fine-tuned under all alternative analysis. So we were planning on doing that by final action, but if we have to have interim meetings at this point, based on whatever direction we go in, we can try to look at it before final action. Part of the issue is that when you do start putting it on a finer scale, you can get into confidentiality issues. So the heat map approach was used by the action plan creators. So I think we have the lat longs, but we don't present it on maps at this stage.
Well, let's say, for example, you drew a line from the Ambrose Bell buoy to the Barnegat Light Whistle buoy. That's a straight line down the coast of that New Jersey hotspot. Could you tell us what was caught inshore and offshore of that line without breaking somebody's confidentiality?
Yeah, I think we can do things like that. Just get specific numbers, and we can do our best with specific requests.
Okay, well, that's my request. So thank you very much, and I'm done for now, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Appreciate those questions and thoughts. I want to go next to Dan Farnham, and then I'll come back to the table here in the room. Dan?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep, very good. I agree that we should move forward with this action, obviously, in my mind anyway. I do have one question for Mr. Penny. What is the projected timeline on the new BIOP?
Mike?
So that's a great question, and I'm sure our BOEM representatives are always asking the same question of us when we initiate an action for them. The timeline in the regulations is 135 days from the day we say that we are initiating, because we have a complete biological assessment. We have not started writing the biological assessment yet. And this is a weird oddity of one agency serving two roles under Endangered Species Act for Section 7 consultations. We are both the consulting agency and the action agency. So in this context, the action agency would be our Sustainable Fisheries Division, which is Jay, and our consulting agency would be our Protected Resources Division, which is Jen Anderson. So I need to meet with both of them and our attorneys, and we need to figure out an approach. Once we have an approach, we'll be able to put down a timeline that would probably be on the order of, 4 to 6 months, maybe a little bit longer, once we initiate. And that's because of some of these nuances of what's the actual action that we're consulting on? Is it the proposed action that's in development? Is it the status quo? And then some other aspects. A lot of the analysis that I mentioned that we would want to be looking at that would be conducted by the Science Center would actually be on the biological assessment side, the front end, before we start writing the opinion. So there's a lot at play before we can put a timeline together. So I wish I had more information, Dan, but that's kind of where we are at this point, given the late breaking aspect of this estimate.
Yeah, that very good, Mike. I appreciate your candor. I have another question. I don't know if it's for Mike, probably not for Mike, maybe for Carson. What's our timeline as far as the framework goes here to develop it, to have the action in place for, I think it's 2024 or whatever date it is? What's our timeline with this framework action?
Yeah, so,
So, oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Carson. I was going to just answer him, but you've got the mic. Go ahead.
sorry, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so we were planning final action in December for both councils. So in between now and final action, we were hoping to have an approved range of alternatives that we would then analyze, get a little bit more feedback from enforcement, and bring it to the AP and committees in October, and then have, once again, have final action in December, rulemaking in early 2024 in order to reduce bycatch by 2024.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Thanks for that, Carson. All right, I'm going to go next to Adam Nowalski, and then Michelle, you're on deck. Adam?
So when we talk about the consultation that needs to occur to try to determine what's happening in the fishery that has resulted in this larger number of takes, is that consultation possibly able to identify the behavior of a limited number of fishermen acting in a way that are contributing to those takes disproportionate to the rest of the fishing group? And if so, is that something actionable?
Mike?
So that's a great and relevant question that I can't give a definitive answer to without looking at data. I think what we would want to do for sure is examine the data that we have on takes, where they're occurring, when they're occurring, what gear is being used. Are there any other distinguishing characteristics of the fishing operations? For example, multi-day trips versus day trips, things of that nature, and look for trends. Look for indications that, it appears that more takes occur on fishing, on these types of fishing trips versus these other types of fishing trips. And I think if we were able to identify some of those trends, then that would certainly inform the response that we would recommend in terms of how to mitigate those takes in the future.
Thanks, Mike. Michelle Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so, Mike, I guess as you start thinking about this new biological opinion, and Chairman Reed raised the issue of, potentially looking at things by DPS. And I was curious, there's a lot of language in here that sort of this definition of large mesh being greater than or equal to 7 inches came about as a result of the language that was in the 2021 biological opinion. So, I mean, it doesn't seem like there's a consistent definition of large mesh, really. among different, I mean, I know that, in North Carolina, we defined large mesh as like greater than or equal to, 5.5 or 6 inches, so I think there are varying definitions of large mesh, and I'm wondering if you're gonna, part of the staff recommendation was, for Dogfish was, based on how large mesh was defined. And so according to the previous BIOP, which said only things, only looking at fisheries that are operating with 7 inches and greater. I mean, are you going to reconsider that definition of large mesh? I mean, obviously, sturgeon are being caught in these smaller mesh fisheries. So, I mean, this is a really long-winded way, I guess, of saying, are we going to make sure that we're capturing the right fisheries, and why did this kind of slip through the cracks the first time, maybe?
Mike?
So I would hesitate to say that it slipped through the cracks. I think what we have to recognize is that the BIOP looked at data from 2011 to 2015 and identified in making making this recommendation or this requirement that we do an action plan and reduce bycatch. It was based on the data suggesting that a significant proportion of the bycatch was occurring in gill nets larger than 7 inches. What we're seeing now, based on more recent data, is that may not be the case. There may be an increase in intake of sturgeon take in smaller mesh sizes, 5, 6 inches. And so that's where I think we need to be looking and focusing some of our attention in terms of the analysis on the more recent data set, and then developing recommendations and mitigation measures based on the more recent data that led to the increase in take. The definition of 7 inches as large mesh is a standard definition that our Protected Resources Division uses, I think, in almost all of its biological opinions. So it may not be standard in terms of it's a universal, definition across all of our fisheries and states and observer programs, but it's certainly standard in terms of the context of our biological opinions.
So 2015 was the most recent data available that was used in the previous BIOP then?
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Mike. I'm going to take 2 more hands, and then I'm going to start to help. Well, you guys can help me as well, kind of carve a path as to what the council wants to do in light of the information we've received today. So I'm going to go next to David Stormer, and then Sonny, I'll come to you after David. Go ahead, David.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Thanks to Mr. Pentney for his update and Ms. Cisneros for her presentation. I'm just wondering, I think that I heard Mike indicate that the estimate of incidental take of Atlantic sturgeon had already exceeded in the Monkfish, Dogfish, gillnet fishery take limit. But then I thought I heard that Carson mentioned in her presentation that a take limit was not specified in the 2021 biological opinion. And just wondering if this is a result of the date ranges used for the 2021 BIOP versus the more recent date range for data evaluated to inform Mike's update. Can we just get a clarification on that relative to a number? Thanks.
Carson?
Yeah, so the number that I was talking about that was not specified is that there wasn't a prescribed % reduction of bycatch needed from the reasonable and prudent measure that came out of the 2021 BIOP. And then Mr. Pentney can correct me if I'm wrong, but their recent evaluation included more years of information and looked at bycatch very recently specific to the gillnet fishery, and that is what has exceeded an incidental take statement that is also included in the biological opinion.
Mike?
Yeah, Carson's correct. The 2021 BIOP did have a specific number of takes for the gillnet that was essentially authorizing the gillnet fishery and the trawl fishery. And looking at the most recent 4 years worth of data, that level was exceeded in the gillnet fishery, but not the trawl fishery.
Okay,
Got
thank you. Thank you. Sonny Gwynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The research track assessment with the dogfish, there's been some things going on with that. Will that have anything to do with what's going on with the sturgeon? As far as, I mean, the email I got is, I wouldn't be surprised if an overfishing would be called on the dogfish. And was there going to be any other discussion on that today or tomorrow about that subject that anybody knows of?
John Hare.
No, I'm not aware of any conversation that's going to happen at this meeting regarding the dogfish research track. I don't know, Chris, in your report, do you talk about sort of the decisions that we made at RCC about timing on that, on the management track?
Could talk more about it. I wasn't planning to. Yeah. We can talk about the timeline, but to Sonny's question, the answer is no, we weren't planning to talk about it this week.
It's just excuse me, it's an email I got from Jason, and the way it sounds, the dogfish don't sound too good. It's going south. He says it's a little too early, but wouldn't be surprised if overfishing definition is called on.
I think, that would be something which would come out of the management track assessment, which Peter will sort of do the assessment and present later this year.
I understand that, but the way the email I got is it doesn't sound good for the dogfish. And with what we're doing here, will that have a bearing on the future of what we're dealing with?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that this action has a bearing on the dogfish fishery itself. Whether or not the information you got about the health of the stock for dogfish, management track and research track assessments that would be planned would inform us as to whether or not we need to take action on dogfish specifically. This action is being considered to take action on dogfish to aid in the conservation of Atlantic sturgeon. Maybe Carson can help clear the air.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add that the decrease in quotas that already occurred for dogfish did come up at the FMAP PDT meeting and AP meeting. And what we heard from Protected Resources Division staff is that a decrease in quotas that might lead to a temporary decrease in effort can't be counted as a bycatch reduction specific to the ESA regulations because it can go back up in the future. So it's not a permanent reduction in effort that would reduce that bycatch reduction indefinitely. So because it could go back up, it isn't able to be counted as a bycatch reduction.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for clearing that up, Carson. I get it now, Sonny. I couldn't quite fit what it was you were saying, but I understand what you were getting at now. Thank you. Okay, seeing no other hands right now, I'm going to go to the audience quickly, and then we need to come back to the table to decide how we want to continue or proceed for today. We'll start with James Fletcher, and then I saw, was it Greg back there? Okay, Greg, you're after James.
James Fletcher, United National Fishermen's Association. I have a question. Are we considering bycatch mortality? Because I have not heard anybody address the mortality of sturgeon. I've not seen any observer data that shows bycatch and mortality separated. Having fished for these fish in the younger years, just about every one of them had to be manually killed. So I know that there's very little from personal experience of mortality in a gill net. And we were fishing 10 and 12-inch nets. Now, the question comes up, if NOAA is concerned and National Marine Fisheries is concerned, there's a fish hatchery in Edenton, North Carolina that says that they can raise 100,000 or whatever number to 2 to 4 feet and release them. So why are we targeting 2 fisheries in the Mid-Atlantic and New England, saying that we are confusing the word bycatch with mortality? What bycatch is good. Recreational fishing, bycatch is good. Nobody's concerned about it. So why are we concerned about bycatch in the commercial industry? My question goes back to the original. What percentage of these fish caught as bycatch are dying? And is there any data? I could not find any data showing the percentages. So I'm hopeful that from the observer data or from the Science Center or from National Marine Fisheries, what percentage is dying? Because on bycatch, we accept 10 to 15% in the recreational industry. So what percentage is dying? And are we using the term bycatch instead of mortality to prevent it? Thank you for your time.
Thanks, James. Mike?
So, Mr. Fletcher asked a reasonable question in terms of distinguishing total take from mortalities. Under the Endangered Species Act, we track both, and we establish incidental take statements for both. The take under the Endangered Species Act includes any interaction, doesn't have to result in a mortality or death. The ITS, just so everybody has the numbers in their head, the ITS that we established for sturgeon in the gillnet fishery was 622 animals per year on average take. Of that, 124 mortalities or lethal takes per year. The latest estimate that we have that's prompting this reinitiation is that there were 1,126 takes per year on average. So not quite, but close to double the ITS, and 327 lethal takes per year. So more than double the lethal take ITS. So we have some work to do. I wanted people to understand it's not just a 1 or 2 or a small increase. These are substantial increases over the ITS, and we do track both overall takes as well as lethal takes.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Greg?
I'll be really quick, Mike. Greg DiDomenico, Luntz Fisheries. If I could just ask a question thank you. Carson, quick question for you. One of the crucial aspects of cutting down on sturgeon catch and mortality in the low profile gear is twine diameter. Can we somehow get that back into this as an alternative or a requirement? Because it highly correlates to lower mortality.
So, I mean, that's something that the council could add. So are you talking about something that is a different twine that would be required versus the low profile net?
It would be in addition to the low profile requirements. You'd also need a requirement of twine diameter.
Okay.
Thank you. I also wanted to lend my support and thank Adam Nowalski for bringing up the issue of this is a situation where some people don't fish as responsibly as others. And I would really like to see a much deeper dive into the aspect of if a small number of vessels contribute heavily to very large bycatch events. I believe that's still the case. And I think there's probably a way to take a deeper dive into that. So thank you, Adam, for bringing that up. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, Greg. I'm going to take one more. I've got two more hands from the audience, and I'm going to end the comment at this point or questions and come back to the council. So I'll start back in the back of the room. Roger, want to come on up? Bonnie, I'll come to you, and you can wrap up public questions and comment.
I fish out of Ocean City, Maryland. Predominantly since the 90s, I've monkfished 90% of my time. I've had a deal with a Princess Anne where I could catch, additional days. So I pretty much landed more monkfish than anybody because I fished more than a lot of days. The problems I see with your write-off is the cost. If we have to switch to 13-inch, like Kevin was bringing up, and tie down the nets, the way things are now with the monk fishery and the way things are with our dock, our boats, upkeep of our engines, I go back to what Dewey said yesterday. You guys don't realize where you're taking us. You're taking us to where we don't exist anymore, and you don't realize it. Last year, we lost 10,000 farms in this country. I don't know how many fishermen you'd lost. I mean, manufacturing's all going overseas. They're three of the bases for this country. And you're on a tenuous ground here when you're making these rules. The other part that was brought up just by the man back here, and he's true, is sturgeon are really heavy-duty fish. They rarely die in the net unless sea lice gets in them or something eats them. I mean, they live, you can put them on the deck and they live, and you can throw them over. They're incredibly durable. They rarely die in the net. And I saw your study saying you have 200 catches. I can catch 200 in a day if I want. I've been fishing I'm 70 now, since I was 20. The fishery in the last 3 or 4 years has turned into this size. Where are they coming from? They're coming from the hatchery. The hatchery is the problem. It's a rebuilt fishery. And the problem is it's not on that list. It's a rebuilt fishery. It's a fishery that could actually be open. You don't want to hear that, but the fishery is a viable fishery right now. I've said it at the other meeting we had. You can go into Delaware Bay and they're leaping all over the place. You can see them all over the place. I can fish off acetate and we don't. I don't want to catch. They're a pain in the ass to get out of the net. You got these barbs, 8 at a time coming in. I've never seen anything like it. And they're all the same size. Boom, like this. The monk fishery, we're not seeing many. We're further offshore. We don't get that many. You might get one here or there. And that's what it used to be like along the beach. So these hatcheries are putting us out of business. And basically, this alternatives you have are just the final nail in the coffin. We got wind power taking our docks, and we got all these regulations. You got no upright lines. And I mean, basically what you're saying, I feel like I'm talking to a wall, is I should look for another job. At my age, I should go look for something else to do because there's no future in commercial fishing. This is just another aspect that just makes me realize how hopeless our position is. And, I mean, basically we're doing it with fossil fuel. We're doing it with farming. We're doing it with manufacturing. We're crippling our country, and we have a real problem. It's called China. And this is just, it's all connected. It's all connected to the fact that we're crippling ourselves unnecessarily. For the pat on the back, we're the good guys, we're going to save the sturgeon. But what you're doing is crippling us. I feel like I'm talking to a wall, but I mean, at one point, I'm just going to stop talking. I won't come to these meetings because I don't see any future in commercial fishing. This is what Dewey said yesterday is right. Our fish houses are gone. The one here in Virginia Beach, it just closed up. Our guy just got a big offer from Windmills. We'll be down to one dock. I mean, it's just happening up and down the coast. We're headed into a whole new era, and wild-caught seafood will not be part of it. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments, Roger. I'm going to wrap things up before we come back to the council with Bonnie Brady. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Hi, thank you, Mike. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Super. Bonnie Brady, Long Island Commercial Fishing Association. I had to take a call, so I had to step away for a moment, but I wanted to know if there had been any discussion since I believe it was 2009 when the stock was considered, sturgeon were considered endangered. Has there been any consideration of delisting or removing to threatened status? I know I've been looking just briefly at the 2021 document, and it refers to 2017 stock assessment. So that's 7 years ago, but I remember at the time that they originally delisted, there was a push by the ASMFC supposedly to delist because the federal government at the time, I was told, did not take into account the state numbers. So I just wanted to ask that question. If anyone has any answers to that, please. Thank you.
Mike?
So, yeah, thanks, Bonnie. Right, so when we list the species as endangered or threatened, we call 5-year reviews. Every 5 years, we update the assessment and determine whether or not the stock should continue to be listed as endangered or threatened or can be removed. For 3 of the DPSs, I don't have at my fingertips which 3, but probably the major DPSs that we're concerned about for sturgeon. We most recently finalized the 5-year review in February 2022, so just over a year ago. And the conclusion of that 5-year review was that the 3 of them are the Gulf of Maine, New York Bight, and Chesapeake Bay DPSs of sturgeon are still endangered.
Is there that document available, Mike? Could you forward that to me, or is there a way we could put that somehow on the council site or something, please? Thank you.
Yeah, we'll get that out.
All right, thanks, Bonnie. All right, at this time, I'd like to come back and decide on how we want to proceed. Carson, if you could put that last slide that you had up. As far as decision points and next steps. Okay, so I haven't heard anything yet today from the MID, and we also heard Eric Reed speak to wanting to continue. I haven't heard anything that would give me any impression that this council would want to stop moving forward with progress on this framework. Is there anyone that would like to speak in support of pausing, slowing down, stopping in any way? Peter?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I don't support stopping. I support maybe we pull back and slow down a little bit. But I guess we still have timelines that we have to, we have to achieve. So I don't even know that slowing down allows us to, accomplish that timeline. So I don't know where that puts us, honestly.
Mike?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, for what it's worth, I would, as I said, I encourage the councils to keep working on this, and I think there's some opportunities for the staff, as we talked about, to refine some of the alternatives and try to narrow in, particularly around some of the hotspots. And without pausing work on this, I think it might be prudent for the council to consider maybe not trying to make the December meeting for final action, but maybe February or April might allow more opportunity for us to coordinate better across our staff and incorporate some of the analysis that we're going to be doing for the BIOP, into the decision points of the councils. Theoretically, having final action in April would still allow if us to get something in place in 2024. So that's, consistent with the intent of the 2021 BIOP. And then, of course, the closer we get to completing the new BIOP, we'll be working, on implementing that. So my advice is keep working, keep making progress where we can, but maybe don't feel hamstrung by the December 2023 deadline.
Peter?
I guess then it would be my recommendation to push the timeline out a little further, so that we can take a final action. I think you said in April. You know, it's
He said
somewhere-
April.
Yeah. Thought you said June. Yeah. So that, you know, hopefully additional information can feed into what it is that we're developing, from the newer biop. It can help guide us. I mean, I don't want to go down this trail. Are we doing all this work and taking up all these staff times with both councils? And then, you know, it's not germane to the discussion anymore. Everything that we've developed, and we have to go back to the drawing board. You know, I'd like to be able to at least use some of the bits and parts that we currently have within our current framework structure to move forward. So I don't know what, other than pushing out the timeline, and if you need a motion on that, I'm happy to, but maybe there needs to be consultation amongst each of the councils and NIMS on, you know, maybe where best that timeline should be pushed out to, because we do have to act in unison with the New England Council and vice versa. So that's my own recommendation.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I'm thinking along the same lines that you are. And so what I'd like to do is, why don't I tell you all what my thoughts are to see whether or not they fit with what you're thinking about as far as moving forward. And if we can reach a consensus about that next steps moving forward, then I think we could do that, with the understanding that based on Mike Penny's comments, there's some flexibility in the time limitations that we had, but not stopping is, I think, very important. So what I'm thinking is that in an effort to move forward, and because of the comments that we heard and some of the data that were presented regarding the dogfish fishery, my suggestion is to leave dogfish in now. Leave dogfish under the umbrella of the framework so that staff can continue to evaluate and analyze the dogfish fishery with a smaller mesh gill net size than 7 inches to see how that plays into this catch of sturgeon. But also based on the information that was presented by the enforcement committee, law enforcement, the soak time, which is being talked about as if it's almost unenforceable. And then the recommendation on alternatives for the 10-minute square issues. So those two recommendations could be added and or I guess one removed and one further developed as recommendations from the law enforcement committee. And please, Carson, correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong, but I see that as a bigger picture of moving forward, keep dogfish in, take the recommendations we've already received from these joint groups, and let's see what the New England Council gets as far as information and what their plans are at the end of June, which is a few weeks from now. And then knowing that we have a little longer of a time period to finalize the development of this framework, we take that information and we apply it possibly at our August meeting. I don't know when the next set of meetings would be, maybe October, where we select the range of alternatives to continue on for final action in early 2024. But if that timing doesn't sound right or I said something wrong, please correct me. That's how I'm thinking we proceed at this point with the unknowns that we have right now with the questions and the answers. Peter?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So one of those unknowns we may have heard a couple of times referenced today is this a few bad eggs that are creating this overall problem in the fishery? And I'm led to believe that there's some not the best business practices taking place by some fishermen that's leading to an excessive bycatch of sturgeon, which we're trying to, get a handle on. So I'd like analysis on that. So I mean, Enough said. Thanks.
Carson?
Yeah, I was just going to say that we did prepare a little bit of a backup table on the number of vessels that have sturgeon takes in the hotspot areas. So that's the slide you're looking at now. So 30 vessels contributed to the takes from 2015 to 2022 in the New Jersey areas, and then 33 for the Delaware, Maryland, Virginia areas. And then looking further at it, 11 vessels had greater than 10 takes in the New Jersey hotspot areas. And then once you break this down by year or time of year, we do start getting into confidentiality issues.
Okay, thanks for that, Carson. Sonny, and then Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree. I think the more data we have, the more information we have will definitely help us out on this issue. And I don't think it'll hurt to prolong it a little bit, as long as we get something done today. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonny. Adam?
Trying to build on your proposed way forward here. The goal of today, I believe, as the agenda item was to approve alternatives, but can staff continue with analysis work if we don't formally approve alternatives today? And I'm seeing a nod, yes. Okay. So assuming that nod yes is true, then it comes back to what do we do? And you put some things forward. First off, let me say that some of the comments we've heard here from the public, I don't just want to gloss over those with regards to these continued actions are destructive to the commercial fishery. We can't just gloss over that. That being said, there are things we have to do here or somebody else is going to do them for us, essentially. So that being said, I agree with the sense that we need to keep Dogfish in the action at this time. I think the issue of the 10-minute square alternatives, the main point here is that we have some straight lines to work with. So I'm not opposed to getting rid of the 10-minute square alternatives with regard, instead trying to choose some other four-sided approaches that way. I do have an issue, though, here with removing the soak time alternatives. And the reason why I would be opposed to saying we're going to remove them now, we got input from the AP that that was a way forward. We had discussion with the committee where they said this was a way forward. Then we brought it to OLE, as we should, and they said this isn't such a good idea. I think at that point, this needs to go back to the AP and the committee for hearing what LE said and see if they can come up with some way to address it. So in terms of something else that we can do, keep Dogfish in, address these other approaches, not the 10-minute square, continue the analysis of the alternatives that are in the document. And I would also like to see go back to the AP and the committee on addressing these soak time concerns from law enforcement to best decide how to move forward with them.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Adam. Thanks for offering that as a path forward. Does anyone, excuse me, Carson, did I see you, were you raising your hand? No. Okay. Dan Farnham, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with everybody, with slowing down a little bit, but moving forward at the same time. I also agree with Adam with keeping the soak time option in there. I mean, there is a possibility that if a vessel wanted to install VMS, maybe that would be a way to utilize the soak time option too. We don't know, but I think we should keep it in there just for the discussion. And I do have one question, though, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair. Can I ask a question about the mortality rate?
Sure.
So I see, this is, I guess, to Mike, Mr. Pendy. Does the mortality rate, I see the rate went up from 20 to 29% from the numbers you just gave us between, for the most recent BIOP. So do you look at the reduction in take or the mortality rate or both? What do you look at in order for the measures we develop to become acceptable?
Mike?
Yeah, thanks. Dan, we're going to look at both. So again, it's, unlike we're just talking about rebuilding a fish stock, for example, we're concerned about dead discards. When we're talking about the Endangered Species Act, we're concerned about take as well as mortality. So take can be a non-lethal take as well as a lethal take. So we have to look at both and develop alternatives and ways to mitigate both lethal as well as non-lethal take.
Yep. Okay, very good. Thank you. Is there any way staff or anybody can look at why the mortality rate increased to 29 or 30%, whatever you want to call it? Can we look at where that increase came from? That might be a way to address, part of the issue here. Thank you.
Carson?
Yeah, I think with the observer data, we have condition. So if we break it down just by the dead sturgeon, we can try to look at that.
Okay, thanks, Carson. All right, at this time, I think we need to decide on how we want to move forward. Peter Hughes has his hand up, I think, with a possible motion.
It's a possible motion. Do we refer it back to the committee for additional refinement based on the newest information that we've received here today? We've had a lot of questions and comments from around the table that have actually introduced some new information into the overall picture of this additional analysis that needs to be done. We refer it back to the committee. The council doesn't take the action such as removing the 10-minute squares right now. Do we let the committee do that? That should be their job, unless they can't do their job, and we have to bring it to council, and the council has to do the committee's job. Do we refer it all back to the committee for additional analysis? I don't know. I'm throwing it out there.
Yeah, it's one way to handle it. I want to make sure, though, if we do that we're going to be effective and efficient in reviewing very similar information with some new added twists, and whether or not that's going to change things wholeheartedly from just taking into consideration some of the suggestions that were already made by the committee members and the law enforcement committee. And I do agree. I think Adam made a good point about soak times. Maybe that needs to be reconsidered. So I don't know that we don't do anything at this point, Peter, and just send it all back to the committee. I think with some guidance, if it is going to go back to the committee, there should be some guidance there as to what it is that we expect of them that's any different from what it was the previous time they met. Let me go to Chris, and then we'll start to come together with a plan here. Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, bringing it all back to the committee on whether to include Dogfish or to remove the 10-minute square option. I'm not sure what the committee's going to say to change our minds today. Maybe we can determine, give some staff feedback on those two things. I think, I supported including Dogfish in this action at the committee meeting before the information we received today about exceeding the incidental take statement. I think the 10-minute square option, I think Carson explained how that's probably not real workable. The soak time one, law enforcement, voice their concerns, but maybe that can go back to the committee to think of some other ways to do it. But maybe just to streamline the tasks the committee has to do might be a way to maybe improve efficiency. I know we're talking about pushing this back a meeting or two, but next April will be here before we know it. And in terms of the other thing about whether to have the law enforcement community meet or enforcement involved with the FMAT and PDT, I don't know if we had any clear discussion on that, but my thought was it might be more efficient just to have enforcement on the FMAT and PDT as they develop these options, as opposed to meeting with both enforcement committees for the councils, again, to just kind of keep things moving at an efficient level, knowing that these aren't the only things that New England and Mid-Atlantic Council staff and the PDT members are working on right now too. So there's just some thoughts based on your initial questions, Mr. Chair, and discussions around the table.
Okay, thanks for that, Chris. Is there anyone else? Joe Semino?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think in general, I'll support what Chris has said. I think there's definitely some value to having a further discussion with the committees and going back to what Greg said about the twine size too. I know for law enforcement, it sounds like a burden for them to deal with soak times, but we've mentioned several times that there are probably some egregious players here. And in those situations, even if it's something that we're not asking law enforcement to constantly enforce, but we know there's those egregious violations, sometimes having things like soak times on the books are valuable. You can make those strong cases, sometimes examples of those cases. So I support that. I would like to see, as the RA pointed out several times, there are separate targets. Mortality is one, takes in general are another. Twine size, in my opinion, I agree with Greg, that definitely plays into that factor. So I'd like to see that come back for a discussion as well.
All right, thanks, Joe. Carson, let's try this. In my notes from all of you guys, I've got the motion that you drafted, Carson, that keeps Dogfish in the action, and it's the second one. Or would we need to take up both? There's two actions under, because I think it's been agreed. I haven't heard anyone say we should not consider leaving Dogfish in the action. But there's some discussion about whether or not to take the law enforcement committee's recommendations for both removing soak times and the 10-minute square alternatives. So I think we could probably use what's already been written to tweak it a bit, but I'll look to Carson for what kind of clarification you might need before we step away from this here today.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that it wasn't a law enforcement committee recommendation, it was direct OLE and Coast Guard input. So just to make sure that people understand that, and then we could modify it to say something that says as modified today, or to be refined in the future, because I think this is kind of worded to directly approve a range of alternatives, but if there's going to be some allowance for refinement later, we might want to soften that, but I can work on modifying it really quickly.
I mean, that sounds good to me. Do you want to modify something based on what you've heard? Or does somebody have something off the top of their head? Adam's always really good at this. Maybe he can just sum it all up for us in one sentence. Go ahead, Adam.
No, it's not good when you oversell, Mr. Chairman, so I don't appreciate that. But I am prepared to go ahead and give this a go, and we'll see what we come up with it. So one thing I'll say before I say this is with regards to the Dogfish, I don't think we need to refer that back to committee. There was nothing that I saw in any of the notes or the presentations that the committee was suggesting we not do anything with Dogfish. The areas here that I think we want them to look at is we want them to go back and look at the 10-minute square issue, the time closures, reconsider the input from law enforcement and the Coast Guard on those areas. And I think what we really want them to take a look at is this new information. Have them look at what is going on that would result in these increased takes, potentially in a fishery like the Dogfish fishery, and then provide feedback on what changes to the alternatives we need here today. So I'm going to move that we task the move that we task the Dogfish and Monkfish committees. Well, we can't task a Monkfish committee because it's a New England committee, correct? So Can we task the joint committee ourselves because it's
I mean, I don't think we can task the Monkfish committee, but we can say move to task the Dogfish committee and recommend that the New England Council task the Monkfish committee.
Well, see, now we're working together. This is great stuff. If we could all do this in all aspects of our lives, it would be wonderful, right? So move that we task the Dogfish committee and recommend the New England Council task the Monkfish committee with reviewing NOAA and law enforcement input on the 10-minute square and the soak time limits, and review and discuss the increase in sturgeon bycatch takes and recommend revisions to the alternatives in light of the new information. I feel like my head, you know, looking outside, you see aircraft carriers and stuff go by. I feel like my head had to become the deck of an aircraft carrier to get that off here, but let's see what we get.
Well, you did it all in one sentence, so you accomplished one goal set up for you. Okay, so we have a motion made on behalf of Adam Nowalski, second. Got two hands up. We'll go Joe Semino. He was first. Adam, I think you've spoken. We've also, a lot of people have spoken in support and in regards to the motion.
Yeah, I'm not offering any additional.
No additional rationale at this point. Joe?
Yeah, just one thing. I think we got a little bit off. The reason why dogfish separate discussion happened is because of the largemouth discussion and the definition of greater than 7 inches. So I hope just inherent in this task is that we're talking about 5 inches and greater, and that's all I wanted to add.
Yeah, I think, Adam, was that your intent? So we can, why don't we, since you were the seconder, Joe, and you and Adam seem to agree, maybe we can just put in parentheses somewhere here without adding a sentence.
Yeah, I'm going to offer, Mr. Chairman, that we don't need to include that here because that was all that was in the document and the alternative so far. So I'm good with that since that's what's in the document.
Okay. Is that clear, Carson?
Yeah, I think since we've said the clarification on the record, I can take that to New England.
Okay, thank you. Is there any comment on the motion? Seeing no comment around the table. Is there anyone from the council online that has any comment? Seeing no comment. At this time, I'd like to call the question. I'll read the motion into the record. In the interest of time, this isn't final action. We've heard from the audience. I'm going to just move forward at this point. The motion is move that we task the Dogfish Committee and recommend the New England Fishery Management Council task the Monkfish Committee with reviewing NOAA and law enforcement input on the 10-minute square and soak time limits and discuss the increase in sturgeon bycatch takes and recommended revisions to the alternatives in light of the new information presented today. Is there any objection to the motion? Seeing no objection, the motion carries by consent. Is there anything else, Carson, that we need to take up under this action today?
No, I think we can work with leadership of the councils on next steps based on the discussion today.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and thank you all for your engagement in that discussion. It's 3:30. Let's take 10 minutes. We'll come back and get the strategic plan from Garfo, and then we'll jump into the wind discussion before we conclude for the day. So we'll come on back at 3:40. Thank you. 2-minute warning, everybody. We're going to start back up again in 2 minutes. Thank you. Yeah, that's what Roger was saying. 10 miles. Yeah.
But then also, like I said, Jason's, don't look good for them.
Yeah.
So they might be on those fishing list. Do that.
Effort goes down, and that has nothing to do with sturgeon. That's just their population, right? It goes up and down.
We might have to stop fishing for a while.
Or reduce how much you catch.
Yeah, our process is gonna be double.
Yeah,
To the live Mike here.
Tell my wife.
I hope so. Me too. I hope that works out for you.
Hey, Mike, your mic is hot.
Okay, folks, if I could ask everybody to please grab your seats. We're going to go ahead and get started back up here in just 30 seconds or so. Okay, folks, thanks. Welcome back from the short break. We are running a little bit behind schedule, so we're going to try to pick up the pace just a little bit so that we can stay on track for the remainder of today. We're not going to take any more breaks. We're just going to jump through the next 2 items on our agenda. We're going to start with a presentation by Mike Pentney with he's the regional administrator for NOAA Fisheries, presenting to us the draft 2024 through 2028 regional strategic plan. So Mike, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will try to make up a little bit of time. So I'll be somewhat brief. So just for context, several years ago, the agency released a national strategic plan for NOAA Fisheries and tasked each of the respective regions, the science centers and the regional offices, to work collaboratively to develop regional strategic plans. Prior to that, the Science Center had its strategic plan and the regional office had our own strategic plan. So the direction from our leadership was to work together on a single strategic plan that represented all of the priorities collectively for the Science Center and the regional offices in each respective NIMS region. So we did that. That strategic plan is enforced through the end of this year, 2023. So it's time for us to develop our next strategic plan, which would go into effect 2024. And so John Hare and I and our staff have been working on a draft strategic plan that we hope to complete by the end of this fiscal year so that it would be effective October 1st, 2023, which is the start of the 2024 fiscal year. Next slide, please. So as I said, this draft plan is developed jointly between the center and GARFO. I will acknowledge that it is constrained to fit some fairly prescriptive guidelines and a template that we were handed from our headquarters leadership. So while I'll be asking for council review and input on the draft strategic plan before we finalize it, there will be some parameters around that because there are things within the draft strategic plan that even we don't have the authority to change. But I did want to make sure that we share our draft strategic plan with the councils and Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission before we finalize it at the end of the summer, beginning of the fall. So that's my intent here, is to present it to you as it stands now so that you have an opportunity to provide some feedback to us over the summer. Next slide, please. So this is just stating the national NOAA Fisheries vision and mission. I won't go through this, but understand that this is context for the strategic plan and the background for our strategic plan. Next slide, please. As I said, the national leadership handed us 3 specific strategic goals that are the national strategic goals, and we were told to develop a strategic plan to meet these goals. So there are 3. One is to adaptively manage fisheries for sustainability and economic competitiveness, 2 is safeguard protected species and propel their recovery, and then 3rd, which is a lot of words, diversify our workforce, promote equity and environmental justice, and improve our mission performance through organizational excellence. Next slide. Within the strategic plan, if you're looking through the draft that we've provided to the council, you'll see that we've identified a number of regional challenges that I've summarized here in a few short bullets, as well as a few of our top priorities for the next 5 years. So I won't read all of those in the interest of trying to save some time. If we can go to the next slide. And then what we've done in the strategic plan, the draft, for each of the 3 goals that I described, we've also been handed a set of very specific strategies that are intended to meet those goals. And so for each of the 3, I'll share with you at very high level what those strategies are. Where I'm most looking for input from the councils and commission, and where it will be most useful would be in the paragraphs that describe how these strategies apply in our region. So in other words, you may not agree with all of the strategies or even with the goal, but that's the framework that we are operating within. However, you might be able to help us better reflect the priorities of the councils in our region in how we describe how we as an agency will strive to meet these strategies. So that would be a great place for some input. Next slide. And so I'm just sharing the strategies that apply to each of the three goals. Next slide. And this is the strategies for that organizational excellence, the word salad goal, I guess. Next slide. And then also for each goal, we've established a list of key performance indicators. So for example, things like maximizing the value and resilience of our seafood sector, increasing sustainable aquaculture production, completing our ESA consultations within the timelines, optimizing workplace flexibilities for our staff, and then increasing our outreach and responsiveness to stakeholders. This would be another area for each goal where we've created these key performance indicators. And so if the council feels that there are some other indicators that would be more appropriate to reflect the priorities and intentions of the council, we would really like to hear from you on those. And that would be an opportunity where we can modify what we've provided in our draft to better reflect the council's comments. Next slide. So timeline for review. When we released the draft plan to the council at the end of last week was right after I submitted it to our leadership in Silver Spring for their review. So Sam Rauch and Janet and others are reviewing it at the same time that you all would be looking at this. In order to ensure that we're able to incorporate and reflect upon any feedback or input that you have, we'd appreciate getting that by the end of July, because we need to have a revised draft back to our headquarters by the end of August. And we intend to publish the final strategic plan by October 1st, which would then inform our action plan for 2024. So that's the sort of the way these all fit together. If you recall, each year I publish an action plan of things that we're going to be focused on for the year, and those link directly to the elements of our strategic plan. So that's what I have, Mr. Chairman. So it's very short, keeping it nice and timely, so we can maybe get back a little bit of time unless there's any questions.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much, Mike. It's the first time you've ever listened to me, I think. The 12, 14 years I've been here. No, thank you for that review of the strategic plan, and I'm glad you brought up the timeline or comments. Does anyone have any questions for Mike? Yeah, I don't see anyone at the table with any questions on the plan. No hands online, so let's go out to the audience. James Fletcher.
James Fletcher, United National Fishermen's Association. And I don't say this facetiously, but nowhere in there did you say to try to increase the younger fishermen or increase anybody to come into the fishing industry. You had a lot to protect your agency, this, that, and the other, but there's nothing that I saw there to try and get more people interested in the fishing industry. We're aging out. I think the average age in North Carolina now is 56 or 57. It used to be down in the 30s. So is it possible that y'all can, and the other thing of it is, you have aquaculture in there. The United National Fishermen's Association has been to this council for over 30 years asking about aquaculture. The agency gave the impression that it had aquaculture, and now we find out that you're only advising on aquaculture. If that is correct or incorrect, tell me. But you don't have an actual way to give aquaculture a hands up in the EEZ. If I'm incorrect, correct me. But back to the original, there's nothing in that to get younger fishermen in or give them a pathway to come in. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Anyone else? Any comments? Any questions for Mike? Dan Farnham. Go ahead, Dan.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. Not for Mike, just to the presentation. I didn't get the slides on my display. I don't know if anybody else remotely didn't get them, but I don't know if it's just me or unilateral.
Yeah, we all had the presentation before in front of us here on our screens. So you may want to try to rejoin the webinar. I was kicked out of the webinar earlier. I could hear, well, obviously I'm sitting here, but I could hear what was going on. I just couldn't see anything on the screen. You may want to try just rejoining.
Yep, will do. Very good. Thank you.
Mike.
And staff have the presentation, so they can certainly send it out to, distribute it out to everybody. I didn't submit it early enough for it to make the briefing book, but staff have it now.
Okay, thanks for that. All right, seeing nothing else at this time. Mike, thanks for the presentation. Is the plan to, let's see, seeking counsel. So there's not going to be an opportunity to come back with a finalized version. It'll just become finalized after comments and work on it by headquarters.
Yeah, I mean, we'll certainly share the final strategic plan with you once we have finalized it. But there won't be an opportunity for another look at a draft. This is it. So if you can get any feedback, including the suggestion by Mr. Fletcher about something looking at bringing in younger fishermen, I appreciate that. As I said, by the end of July would be helpful.
Okay, thanks. Dr. Moore?
Mr. Chair, the staff will take a look at the draft and put together some comments for council consideration and get those out for review prior to the deadline.
Great, thank you. Okay, seeing nothing else at this time, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next item on this afternoon's agenda, which is an offshore wind update. We have a number of presenters. planned for this discussion. We have BOEM and Brian Hooker with us here. How you doing, Brian? As I stated before, we're running a bit behind, so if there's anything you can do to try to keep us somewhat on schedule for the day, that would be helpful, but with the understanding that it's not your fault where we are. So do what you can, but we're looking forward to your presentation whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and no, I appreciate the move to move things along. It's my father's 80th birthday today, and I'm hoping to get over to his house to celebrate. So again, my name is Brian Hooker. I'm the biology team lead within the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, Office of Renewable Energy Programs. And thanks again for the opportunity to give you an update this afternoon. Next, oh, I guess I can control it. Oh, there we go. I don't have to. So real quickly, some of the topics that staff had asked to get updates on are the Ocean Wind 1 project, Atlantic Shore South, the status of the fisheries mitigation guidance, and programmatic EIS, and I was going to update on the National Academy's Standing Committee on Offshore Wind and Fisheries, which is new, as well as some environmental studies updates. Next slide. Okay. So where we are with Ocean Wind, this is the next project that's due for a final decision. So we released the final environmental impact statement just on May 26th recently, and a final record of decision is to approve or disapprove the project is scheduled for July 7th. Again, there's the website with the final environmental impact statement located on there. Encourage folks to take a look at it. You know, we did respond to several comments, updated a lot of the mitigation measures that are in the appendix. There's a full appendix on mitigation measures, so I encourage folks to take a look at that. Next slide, please. So also in the Mid-Atlantic, in that same New Jersey wind energy area, is Atlantic Shore South. This one, we're actually just beginning the DEIS. We just published the DEIS and are now in the middle, or just beginning a 45-day public comment period. And if anyone's in New Jersey later in June, on June 21st, we'll be in Manahawkin at 5 o'clock, and June 22nd in Atlantic City. And then there'll also be a virtual meeting on June 26th at 1 p.m. All of that is available via the link that is on the slide to register and where those meetings are exactly taking place. So look forward to council and the public's comment on that project. So where are we with the fisheries mitigation guidance? I think probably last time I was here with the council, we were targeting late spring of this year to get that out. Where we are right now is that we elected to, based on some comments we had from federally recognized tribes, to engage in government-to-government consultation on the draft guidance. So we're still working to schedule those meetings with the tribes so that they fully understand what is in that guidance. And as soon as we're able to conclude those consultations, we hope to move forward with the final guidance. Again, there's the website is linked there below. The final guidance is pending the outcome of those tribal consultations. I will say that I think what I've seen from lessees thus far is that they are using the draft guidance in their construction and operations plan updates. For instance, in the Ocean Wind 1 FEIS, you'll find in the and the updated mitigation measures that the applicant has basically proposed to do, or the lessee has proposed to do what is outlined in the draft guidance. So I think the draft guidance is still providing guidance and being taken, seriously by lessees in their plans being submitted to BOEM. Next slide, please. Onto Central Atlantic. This is one of the ones that we have kind of added an additional step to the public review process. Again, I think this is in response to a lot of comments that we received not only from the council, but from the public as well. So we went out with a public draft wind energy area for comment ahead of the actual final wind energy area. So a lot of changes. The red there, I think, is the original call for information and nominations. And you can see that the area has been greatly reduced. In the draft, we identified a priority 1, priority 2 area that will be further winnowed in the final wind energy areas. So again, I really appreciate the comments, and I think many of you on the council have contributed to some of the meetings we've been having on understanding some of the fisheries that occur, not just on the shelf, but in this case, off the shelf, because it's our first deep water proposal. So appreciate that. And hopefully soon this summer, we'll have the announcement of the final wind energy area. After that announcement, then we do an environmental assessment for lease issuance and site assessment activities. So still more to come on the Central Atlantic wind energy areas. Next slide, please. Regarding the New York Bight itself, the newer New York Bight leases are we're doing a programmatic environmental impact statement for those. Again, that programmatic environmental impact statement, I want to be really clear, isn't to approve or disapprove those projects, but really trying to lay down the full environmental framework, the full baseline of information from which we can tier off the individual construction and operations plans. And that, we believe, will not only help us in the EISs that will tier from those, but also the consultations, biological assessments, and EFH consultations that will stem from those individual plans as well. What the primary action that is being analyzed in that are what we are a suite of different mitigation measures. So that's what the record of decision will be on in the draft EIS, is around mitigation measures that may be applicable to all the projects being evaluated in that programmatic environmental impact statement. Okay, next slide. Another recent development is the convening of the National Academies of Sciences Standing Committee on Offshore Wind and Fisheries. As this council knows, we have relied on the council, both in the Northeast, both the New England and Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Councils, for a lot of our opportunities to engage the fishing public, because you guys are have these standing meetings, and people are gathered already as a result of those meetings. But one of the deficiencies that have identified with BOEM is that BOEM does not have a FACA type committee or a national committee for which we can engage with on different ideas. We still don't have a Federal Advisory Committee Act committee, but this group through the National Academies of Science, we hope can present an additional opportunity, a sounding board, to really engage with not only fishermen, but fishery scientists on things from BOEM guidance documents to mitigation to best management practices for communication, liaisons. There's a whole suite of things that we hope this committee can help us with. And that committee chair, I think at the end of the last meeting, already teed up some possible topics that they're willing to take on. And I think we look forward to engaging with them again, likely in the fall. All right, next slide. On to the environmental studies program more broadly. The 2024-2025 studies development plan will be available, we think, in mid-June. So the cover there is the 23-24, but the 24-25 should be available later this month. In that, you'll see some of the recent projects that we have awarded, including a nature-inclusive design study, which I'll talk about in a moment, a connectivity study looking at connectivity of marine species, primarily marine fish, between turbines and nearby reef areas in southern New England. And also in around November, that's when we do our annual solicitation for new study ideas. So again, really appreciate the study ideas that we do get from the public, and they really do go forward to informing the projects that we do put forward. Matter of fact, one I just forgot to mention is that published today in GSA eBuy is a project that on looking at surf clam and scallop spatial use, and really trying to understand better the spatial use of those vessels. Both of those industries had expressed to us a real interest in in diving into deeper how those vessels actually operate within and around an offshore wind facility. And we hope that project is able to also utilize the Fisheries Knowledge Trust that was developed for the surf clam fishery as well. Okay, next slide. So I did want to highlight this one because it's happening basically right off the coast of where we are right now, off Virginia Beach. I think they're actually one of the staging ports is here. I think they're even going out of Ruby Inlet. But this is evaluating the effectiveness of nature-inclusive design materials. So I think we've had a lot of questions about, just how good are some of the different materials that are being, put down, either for cable protection measures, for scour measures. How good are they? What are the differences in how they promote or attract, fisheries and other marine epifauna to them to be able to act as natural habitat? So we're incredibly thankful to the Virginia Marine Resources Commission and their artificial reef program for working with us and deploying these materials at Tower Reef. We hope to get those materials deployed later this month. And anyway, those results will definitely help inform mitigation measures we might make in regards to the types of materials that are deployed in future wind facilities. And I think that wraps up my highlights. Happy to take any questions folks might have on this or anything else related to BOEM.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Let me see if I have any hands. Michelle.
Yeah, thanks for the update, Brian. Just wondering if maybe afterwards you can pass along to staff the link to the study that you mentioned on scallops and surf clam use, that just a link to that from the environmental studies program. That'd be great.
I certainly will try. It is in GSA eBuy, which you need an account to actually. I'm trying to figure out how to share it more broadly, but it's to access it. I think you need a GSA eBuy account, a small business account, but I'll at least provide the RFP number.
Okay, anyone else with any questions for Brian? Okay, seeing none. I did see a hand online. Is there anyone, let me ask, is there anyone online like to ask any questions or provide any comments or feedback for Brian? Okay, seeing none at this time, how about the audience? All right, Brian, I think you're off the hook. No pun intended.
Thank you very much.
Oh, Chris just told me it's your birthday, so we can either sing to you, but since we're behind, we'll just say happy birthday.
No, not my birthday, my father's birthday.
Oh. Thanks for the poor information, Chris. Okay, next, our next update here is the State Working Group on Compensation. We have Mr. Joe Semino. Going to provide us comments or a presentation?
Yeah, there's a few slides. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I didn't want Brian or Mike to feel too uncomfortable on their wordy slides, so I'm going to start off with a wordy slide. This is an update. This council has heard about this initiative. It's been going on for some time now. If there are questions, I'd encourage council members to get up with their state leads. We are now at 11 states, so the states of Maine through North Carolina are all part of this initiative. You can also reach out to me specifically or to Chris Olaf at OSIW. So I'll start off again with a little bit on this initiative. This is an initiative to raise compensatory mitigation funds, or we're not interested in the mechanism for raising the funds. This is a framework for a standardization on how these funds and an administrator for these funds could go forward. We're looking to be consistent with fisheries mitigation guidance that's being developed by BOEM. We fully expect that that is where, at least for direct compensation, a lot of the MOUs, as Brian had mentioned, will be going forward. And so one of the important things that states are looking to do here is not compete with each other or reinvent the wheel, or worry about stuff that's getting left through the cracks if this is done on an individual, state-by-state, project-by-project basis. We're looking to create more of a one-stop shop, so to speak. One of the things that we know needs to happen, and again, this initiative has been going on for some time, but is to move forward as quickly as possible. So there's really an immediate need for this third-party mechanism. If we could go to the next slide, thank you. So because this is not necessarily mandatory compensation that can be required by the BOEM process outside of the NEPA process, this fund needs, or the funds we know and the process for this one-stop shop needs to be appealing to both the wind energy companies that are looking to deal with the states and the individual fishers for the compensation. So this group, along with the help of, excuse me, if we could take one step back, go back to my first slide. I did skip one important element. So it isn't just the states. The states have been working with the Consensus Building Institute and also the Special Initiative for Offshore Wind. And so those groups have really been helping keep the 9 states together. And we've also been working, we've reached out and had direct discussions with BOEM, with ACP, and also with ROTA and some of the other groups through the state agencies for industry. Thank you. If we can move forward again. And this gets to some of that. So there was, in one of my previous updates, a draft initiative for what an RFP would look like to set up a regional administrator and a fund. Original comments on that helped us craft another initiative that was put out in April. And we are continuing to work on the RFP. One more slide here. So there's some examples out there from both disaster relief and oil and gas exploration on what this can look like, but there's certainly still a lot of questions, on eligibility, on the governance structure of the administration. So there are 2 working groups that have been in place since September of last year to start to look at those, one specifically on governance and one on the other technical issues. We know that an important one will be looking at eligibility. since both parties obviously have concerns on what exactly that looks like. And there are different types of funds that can go into this besides just direct compensation. So also, we have seen some discussions on innovation funds and navigation and safety funds. So there's the potential for all of those to be a part of this discussion. And we know that they may come in stages as we develop this administrator with perhaps direct compensation kicking us off, and then things like innovation funds coming in later. I think I just have one more slide. Yeah, so looking ahead, and I'm sure I'll be giving updates on this again in the future, but we're looking to, with an RFP, select a regional fund administrator, through some of the working groups, establish what a governance body looks like for this administration and fund. Continue to design and implement what fishing engagement means for this. And then the design for the claims process itself. Obviously, one of the complications is having a third party when we're dealing with confidential data and eligibility for individuals. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Any questions for Joe? Chris Moore?
Mr. Chair, I have a quick one. What's the timeline for all of this?
Yeah, so it's still in the works to some extent, Chris. But we are hoping by this summer that the RFP is moving forward, and then, excuse me, and then from there, establishing what the governance structure actually looks like. So it will be moving pretty quickly, and I think there's potential that by our next council meeting, I could have more information on what that looks like.
All right, thanks, Joe. Any other questions? Okay, I see a couple hands. I'll start with Sonny Gwynn.
Thank you for that, Joe. Just a futuristic scenario on this. Just say, for instance, I'm fishing and all of a sudden I lose the fish because of the pounding or because they're putting windmills in, and I do get compensated. But then they come back a few years after that and they say, okay, we're going to reallocate. And how much fish did you catch in these certain years? And because of the windmills, and this is just hypothetically speaking, that I didn't catch any fish because of the windmills, but my futuristic quota is going to be on that certain years that I didn't catch them. Has that been discussed?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm not going to put Brian on the spot, but I think that goes more towards BOEM's guidance on what compensation looks like, and those kinds of things have been discussed to some extent. I happen to be part of the working group on that. So this fund in particular, and what the states are trying to set up here, is that latter part of not how do you establish what people are paid, but how does that, what's the out mechanism? How is that paid out and equally and to each individual, regardless of what state they're in. So this particular initiative isn't looking at that, but it's certainly been discussed.
Okay, anyone else from the council? Okay, seeing none, I have James Fletcher from the audience.
James Fletcher, United National Fishermen's Association. Is there anywhere in this compensation that if a man holds a federal commercial fishing license or state commercial fishing license, that the electrical companies would give him his electricity at his house or his business for free? And rather than having all this, you would be compensating the fishermen and the fish houses directly with power? Is it possible to do that? I know it's outside of the box and not in the line of thought process, but would it be possible to do that?
Jim, I've known you a long time. I wouldn't expect anything that wasn't outside the box. But I will say that I think any person presenting today other than me should answer that question.
Okay, thanks for that. Here's a name I haven't said in quite a while, Tony Delernia. I've known online. Tony. Go ahead.
Hello, Mike, and hello, Council. It's good to be with you, even though it's remotely. Joe, my question for you is economic loss. How is that defined? Because suppose a vessel has to be modified to operate safely in a wind energy area. Would that be considered an economic loss, the cost that would be incurred in the modifications to operate in that area?
Yeah, again, and my apologies if I seem flippant to James, but and hi Tony, it's good to talk to you. But again, what we're working on here isn't the mechanism in, but the mechanism out. But what we are hoping for is standardization on the mechanism in. So I can't answer your question exactly, or Jim's, or Sonny's to some extent. But what I can say is that the hope here is that whatever is agreed upon is what is done for all, at least 11 states, but perhaps it's a model for, the southern states as well, for the entire Atlantic, and then, maybe a model even for the West Coast and the Gulf.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you. I just hope that I look forward to seeing the definition of economic loss, because I think it could take many different forms, not just fished out of loss, but again, perhaps additional costs that may be incurred in order to safely operate in those areas. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, my hand.
All right, thanks, Tony. Julie?
Okay. My first meeting still. My name is Julie Evans. I'm the East Hampton Town Fisheries Advisory Committee person. I represent all fishermen in East Hampton Town, commercial, recreational, for hire industry. And we have a lot of experience with wind energy. We were the first ones to have to go through the process, and we were the first ones to suffer losses to our fishermen. My question for Mr. Semino, should he choose to answer it, is how large of a fund do you think you will need?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. It's, I guess that depends on, the level of participation that we see from the companies. This isn't mandatory, right? So it's the companies agreeing to participate in this fund. So that will establish how many projects we're talking about, which will then reflect how much this fund would need, right? And, the hope of establishing a third party is that they have the ability to keep this functioning with whatever amount of input, and then the output going specifically to those direct impacts.
Thank you. Can I ask a follow-up question, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead.
So for the states that already have had losses, like in New York, and we've had some that weren't compensated, would this be retroactive to them?
That's a great question, and probably the toughest one I've had so far. I don't know. Again, that would have to be a negotiation and a discussion on what all interested parties are willing to accept here. I think it would be a tough negotiation to do that. The states have certainly talked about it, in part because we've heard from many in the industry and from other folks within the states that would be very meaningful to them. So I don't have an answer on that. It's a really, I think it's one of the most challenging questions that we're dealing with here, because time is of the essence and these projects are moving along. And, again, a lot of these things are happening probably more slowly than we would all hope.
I agree, and I think every fisherman in East Hampton Town, especially Montauk, would agree with that. We have a brand new project happening. We've been through processes where, our state agencies have taken years during COVID discussing these issues. And I encourage anyone who wants some background on it to contact me. I would be happy to help you because I've been through it. I used to be a representative, not a liaison, but I was a representative for Deepwater, and that became Worsted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, thanks, Joe. Appreciate that. We'll look forward to continued update. Excuse me. Next, I'd like to go to Katie Westfall for the NOAA Fisheries update. I believe we have Katie online.
You do. Is my audio coming through okay?
Sound great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having me today. It's an honor to join you and to speak with the council. For those who don't know me, my name is Katie Westfall. I recently joined NOAA Fisheries as a senior advisor. It's good to see many familiar names, and I wish I could be there with you all in person this week. I hope to keep it short to try to help us make up some time. I know there's a number of speakers in the queue, but just wanted to share a couple updates on the NOAA Fisheries end. A little bit about me and my new role at NOAA Fisheries. So I came to the agency in late February with 15 years of natural resource conservation experience. And I've been focused at the intersection of environmental policy, politics, science, and communications. Before joining NOAA Fisheries, I spent 7 years at Environmental Defense Fund, where I served most recently as the Senior Director of Resilient Fisheries. So in that role, I worked with fishermen, industry representatives, supply chain actors, technology providers, conservation groups, policymakers, and researchers, really to improve the sustainability, economic performance, and resilience of wild capture fisheries through policy science and technology. I also served as a Knaus Fellow in the Office of Congressman Jared Huffman of Northern California. And in this role, I advised on natural resource policy, including on fisheries and oceans issues, and worked quite a bit on Magnuson-Stevens Act. So a little bit about my role at NOAA Fisheries, which is new. It has been an honor to join the NOAA team and just a really incredible team here at NOAA Fisheries. And my work is to support the administration's goal of deploying offshore wind while maintaining the health of marine ecosystems, ensuring the vitality of our fishing sectors, and improving the resilience of coastal communities. In my role, I serve as an advisor to NOAA Fisheries Assistant Administrator Janet Coit on all things offshore wind. And part of my role is also to liaise internally within the federal government across agencies, as well as with external stakeholders. So in particular, I've been working with developers, the fishing industry, states, tribes, and others to develop and deepen partnerships, both at the regional level and at the national level. So joining you all today at the council is a core part of my function, and it's one of the things I enjoy the most. So in addition, I'm looking at bigger picture ways the permitting process and coordination across federal agencies and with important external stakeholders can be improved. Next slide, please. So as we know, a pillar of the President's climate change mitigation plan is the development of offshore wind. And while it's critically important that we move aggressively to meet greenhouse gas emission reduction goals to slow the rate of climate change, it's equally important that we pursue this course in a way that maintains biodiversity for our marine ecosystems and ensures compliance with our strong environmental laws. As well, we aim to maintain the vitality of the fishing industry and improve the resilience of our coastal communities, as I mentioned. So while BOEM is the lead agency on offshore energy development, our mission at NOAA and our expertise and responsibilities are really key to successfully meeting the President's goal. So toward that end, NOAA, we work in close partnership with BOEM and other federal agencies, as well as with states, tribes, and other stakeholders. And our functions in this capacity really include regulatory authorizations and environmental review, providing sort of the science, data, and other services to inform BOEM's decision-making on offshore wind, siting and other decisions, and really engaging with states, federal and tribal governments, as well as stakeholders, including fishermen. So I'm going to talk about a few updates on NOAA efforts across regions as part of this effort. So I'm going to touch on budget, fishing survey mitigation efforts, the North Atlantic right whale and offshore wind strategy, and touch on the topic that we just heard from Joe on, the fisheries impact kind of compensation efforts. Next slide, please. So I know you all have received many offshore wind presentations recently and are familiar with the process. So I'll just quickly mention a few things here on process. The authorization process for offshore wind development has multiple steps and really can be simplified into 4 bins that you see here in this graphic on the left. NOAA Fisheries is engaged throughout the entire process and really keeping up with the growing demand for our expertise in regulatory review, and the science needed to support this is an ongoing challenge. The workload is tremendous. The number of offshore wind farms that require environmental reviews have increased from 4 to 10 in the last 2 years, with an additional 4 projects kicking off environmental review in 2023 for a total concurrent review workload of 14 projects. BOEM has held 11 offshore wind lease sales and issued 27 commercial wind leases. And by 2025, we anticipate there could be 4 more commercial lease auctions in the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of Maine, and off the coast of Central Atlantic and Oregon. Next slide, please. So in terms of budget, as I've mentioned, we've made significant progress on permitting and environmental reviews. Core to this is really ramping up budget-wise and staffing-wise. We've expanded our capacity in FY22 and 23 to focus demands of our services, start really building out teams in other regions in anticipation of offshore wind development, and begin to address and mitigate the impacts to our scientific surveys. So the administration recognizes the incredible need related to our role in this process and included increases to our budget to keep up with the extensive new workload and impacts to our scientific surveys. So additional funding identified in the President's FY24 budget includes funding to ensure the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic is fully supported to meet current and future challenges of regulatory and scientific review, provide resources in preparation for increased demands in other regions, and to continue to prioritize funding for planning for mitigating NOAA fisheries scientific surveys, which is incredibly important. And that's what I'll talk about next. Next slide, please. So our science plays a key role in characterizing impacts to fisheries protected resources and their habitats. I don't think I need to tell you all how important this is. Ensuring our ability to fully mitigate the impacts to offshore wind on our scientific surveys remains central to my priorities as we continue to work with BOEM and other partners. NOAA fisheries surveys are essential for collecting the data to inform sustainable management of our nation's fisheries, recovery protected resources, conservation of habitats and ecosystems, and really understanding the impacts of climate change. So just really critical overall. And we know that offshore wind development will likely affect our surveys by precluding access to sampling areas, impacting statistical design, altering habitats, and interfering with survey operations. We have an enormous amount of surveys across the country, 450 fishery stocks, 200 marine mammal stocks, 165 threatened and endangered species. These assessments rely on more than 50 long-term standardized surveys, many of which have been going on for multiple decades. So sustaining these surveys with consistent sampling design is an essential feature, allowing NOAA fisheries to examine the status and trends of our species consistently through time. And so to that end, recognizing the importance, in December 2022, we finalized a joint BOEM National Marine Fisheries Service survey mitigation strategy to guide the development and implementation of a program to mitigate impacts of wind energy development on fisheries surveys. So this strategy is really intended to guide the development and implementation of a program to mitigate impacts on fisheries surveys in the region. It's specifically focused in the Northeast US. and will include survey-specific mitigation plans for each impacted survey, including both vessel and aerial surveys. While it is specific to the Northeast U.S. region, and that's Maine to North Carolina, it is generally applicable to other regions of the country and will be kind of an important example as offshore wind development moves forward in other regions. So BOEM and NOAA Fisheries have been working together on implementation and have established an implementation team. The NOAA Fisheries is working to draft specific mitigation plans for each of the 13 surveys that have been identified as impacted by wind development in the Northeast. Let me move on to, next slide, please. Let me move on to, let's see here. Fisheries mitigation here. Actually, can you go back a slide here? Let's see here. Oh, yes, great. Sorry, I wanted to also touch on the North Atlantic right whale and offshore wind strategy. So as we all know, North Atlantic right whales are critically endangered, necessitating precaution to ensure that offshore wind development is carried out in a way that minimizes adverse effects to the species and to ecosystems on which it depends. BOEM and NOAA Fisheries initiated the development of shared draft North Atlantic right whale and offshore wind strategy. And this really focuses on integrating past, present, and future efforts related to North Atlantic right whales and offshore wind. It identifies a number of actions under 3 broad categories. And so that is mitigation and design, support tools, research and monitoring, and collaboration, communication, and outreach. So it was released for public comment in October 2022. And during that comment period, the agencies received over 7,500 comment letters on the draft strategy. So we are currently working through all of those comments and identifying a list of appropriate changes. So once that strategy is finalized, both BOEM and NOAA Fisheries will begin notification, and we'll certainly be in touch with the council. Next slide, please. So just touching on a little bit of what Joe had mentioned on fisheries impact compensation, more broadly related to the BOEM guidance, we continue to provide technical input to BOEM on the social and economic impacts of offshore wind development on fishing communities. It's important to note that NOAA Fisheries doesn't have a direct role in determining compensation mitigation to fisheries affected by offshore wind, but we appreciate BOEM's efforts to engage directly with fishery management councils to ensure that they're really hearing directly from fisheries stakeholders. We also continue to hear lots of interest on this topic on the Hill, and we've been providing technical input to various Hill offices whenever we receive it. And we have been engaging and very much appreciate the state-led initiative on offshore wind and their efforts to develop a regional funding and minister for compensatory mitigation for offshore wind impacts. So I'll leave it there and I'll just wrap up to say that I'll be sure to share my contact info with council staff. And like I mentioned, a big part of my role is liaising with fishery stakeholders. So I welcome anyone reaching out at any time with any questions or comments. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Katie. Let me look to see if any members of the council have any questions for you. I don't see any council members or current council members. I do have Tony DeLernia from the audience. Tony, do you have a question for Katie?
Yes, I do. Thank you again, Mike. Currently, Katie, there's constructions occurring 35 miles east of Montauk Point. The South Fork wind farm is being developed. Cable laying occurred during the months of March, February into March. Can you tell me, was any of the surveys that were undergoing or occurring this past late winter, early spring, when any of those surveys, were their protocols modified in response to the work that's currently going on?
Thank you very much, Tony. That's a really good, very specific regional question that I might have to get back to you on, unless I hate to put Mike on the spot, but I have to get back to you on that specific issue with the specific project.
May not have to do that, Katie. John Hare just raised his hand. Go ahead, John.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Tony. No protocols were modified owing to the construction, but I'm going to be talking about it tomorrow. Our spring bottom trawl survey in the area did not occur because of issues with the Bigelow. So, nothing was changed because we didn't have our spring survey.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll look forward to hearing your report tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other members of the council? Anyone from the public? Any questions for Katie? Sonny?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Katie, for your presentation. And I'm going to ask you the same question on not the monetary part of the compensation, but on the landings part. Is that on your radar? Have you had any talk about the landings from the wind's power?
Maybe you could rephrase that a little bit for me, Sonny, just in terms of like how compensation is calculated. Is that your question?
My interest is in the landings, the fisheries landings, which are so important to fisheries management. If the wind power is interrupted in my fisheries and I can't land the fish, well, then future management could be made from, say, that year's landings. And if I don't have the landings, it could change the way that, say, a state gets a percentage of a quota, or a fisherman gets a part of the fisheries, and that's what I'm more interested in.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Very similar to, I think, the previous question that we had on sort of maybe some of the future management implications and quota relationship. I'm not sure I have a good answer for you. And might see if any of my NOAA colleagues have a response. But it is a very good question.
Sonny?
Just to follow up, yeah, I'm putting it on the radar, and that's why I'm asking the question. That's so that maybe it could be a form of topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Sonny. Mike?
Yeah, I mean, Sonny asked a good question, but I think it's one of the things that's going to be a continuing and probably growing challenge for us collectively, council, agency, science center, in terms of how we respond in our management approaches to the information that we're getting. For example, if we see landings of a particular species declining, first we have to identify whether landings are declining because fishermen can't access the resource, or landings are declining because the resource is in decline and the fishermen can't find the resource, or if there's something else at play. And that's a lot of confounds in the data that I think are going to be very challenging for us to tease apart and understand then how to respond with our management. But it is something that I think we're going to be looking at and have to deal with over the coming 10, 20 years.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Okay, Katie, thank you for your presentation. I'm going to go ahead and move on to our next presenter with South Fork Wind. We have Julia Prince. Julia, welcome, and whenever you're ready to start your presentation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the council. My name is Julia Prince. I am a marine affairs specialist and fisheries liaison for South Fork Wind, and I'm here to give you an update on construction activities. Next slide, Stephen. Thank you. So what you're looking at here is a chart with the South Fork Wind farm on it and the export cable. The export cable, just to remind everybody, is the size of a large dinner plate. It's a 138 kV cable, and the wind farm itself is a 132 megawatt wind farm, which will consist of 12 turbines, 1 substation, and that will power approximately 70,000 homes. So today, we're going to go over the 5 different portions of construction. Next slide. But before we get into that, I want to remind everybody to please sign up for our Northeast Mariners briefings. There are several ways to do this. You can go online and just sign up, or you can scan the QR code you see there. The Mariners briefings go out twice a week, and they give a 3- and a 7-day outlook. If you do not want to read the mariner's briefing, you call our wind line. The number is right there. And you can listen to a recording of our planned activities. Next slide, please. In addition to our mariner's briefings, we also have several other forms of outreach, both onshore and offshore, and virtually. So I would definitely ask that everybody not only sign up for our mariner's briefings, and please take a really good look at them. They're chock full of information. And we have a lot of different charts on our mariner's briefings, some with Loran lines, some with lat longs. And all of those, you will see a stoplight chart, which means green, there's no activities, yellow, survey activities, and red would indicate construction or heavy construction. Also, our website, please take a look at that. Tons of information. On the onshore side, there are people like myself, fisheries liaisons, and also fisheries representatives. In Montauk, there's Paul Farnham at the Montauk Fish Dock. He is our local fisheries rep. And now offshore, we also have fisheries liaison officers. These are fishermen who are not currently fishing, who are on the vessels, and they are there for radio communications, text messages, calls from fishermen in the areas who may have questions or concerns. In addition to the FLOs, we have safety vessels that are out there. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. And I would just remind everybody to keep their radio on, turn it up, and feel free to reach out on 13 and 16 to the safety vessels and also to the fishery liaisons on the construction and survey vessels. Next slide, please. Okay, we have buried our export cable. So this was done in 2 sections. Section A was close to the beach at Beach Lane in East Hampton, where we did our interconnection. And as you can see, the Livingstone vessel there, we had an HDD about 30 feet under the beach, and it popped up with that drill. The Livingstone here fed a conduit to that drill, and that conduit was pulled back under the beach. And then the cable was pulled from the ship back to the beach to make landfall in East Hampton at Wainscott Beach. Once that interconnection was done, the Livingstone continued eastward, laying cable on the seabed. Once that was done, she turned around using that trencher you can see in the bottom left, and she trenched the cable in. We then repeated that exact process for Section B, which went all the way out to the lease site. So this portion of the job is done. Next slide, please. I mentioned safety vessels. When that cable was on the seabed, we had 1 safety vessel every 6 nautical miles. And again, the individuals who were on these ships were there to listen and respond to commercial fishermen who had questions or concerns, in addition to the FLOs. The request to fishermen, and it's a request, never an ask or a tell, but request was for that there be no bottom contact within 500 meters of that cable. Now, keep in mind that cable was not electrified. Next, I don't think I have anything else there. Yep, next, thank you. Okay, what you're looking at here is the BOCA lift. That vessel you see there is a heavy construction vessel that has that big crane on it. This week, we are beginning our foundation installation using the BOCA lift. We'll be installing 13 monopiles. We will have FLOs out there, and we will have our safety zone and safety vessels out there as well. Next slide, please. And what I say out there, each foundation site, there will be a 500-meter safety zone around it, so a 1/4 mile. At the center of that site, you'll have the monopile. The BOCA lift will put that monopile up. And we ask that during this time, that everybody really stay tuned to the Coast Guard and their local notices, because they may put out a safety zone. And we also just want everybody to understand that for Ørsted, safety is first. So making sure that you're reading the mariners briefings, understand that there is heavy construction out there in that 500-meter zone around the monopile is very important. Now, we won't do all the monopiles at once. We'll move this 500-meter zone from monopile to monopile as we install all 13. Next slide, please. There's 2 resources outside that I'd ask you to take a look at. One is navigating in the South Fork Wind Farm, and the other is temporary U.S. Coast Guard safety zones. The safety zones will be temporary. Say each monopile maybe 48 hours, but we don't like to put a time frame on anything because, as you all know, we are weather dependent, much like everybody else working out there on the ocean. These documents are, like I said, outside, but they are also on our website with tons of other literature to learn and read about South Fork Wind. Next slide, please. The vessels that will be out in that 500-meter safety zone and also transiting back and forth to various ports in the Northeast will be some of the vessels you see here. I mentioned the Boca. She's our heavy construction vessel. We also have the Union Bear. And the Union Bear is going to provide our sound mitigation or bubble curtain. We'll also have protected species observer vessels. Like I said, we'll have fishery liaisons officers out there, safety vessels, and other completion vessels. Next slide, please. The first monopile we install will be for the OSS, the offshore substation. The offshore substation has been on its way from Texas for a few weeks now. It was built in Texas, put on a barge, and shipped up in this direction. Now, that Boca lift, once she installs that foundation, we'll then put the substation on top and then move to our next foundation. Next slide, please. Okay, so after we do all those monopiles, or as we do the monopiles, we're also going to be doing our array cable installation. This is the exact same process as I described for our export cable, and the Livingstone will also be doing this work, meaning she will lay the cable and go back and trench it in. Next slide, please. So after we have our monopiles installed and our array cable installed, then we come back and we put our WTGs, our wind turbine generators, onto those monopiles. These pieces will be coming from New London, and they will be transported offshore via barge. And so you're going to see a lot of tugs and barges out in that area as well. Yeah, CTVs, helicopters, and lots of transport between New London and the South Fork Wind lease area. Next slide, please. I think that's it. I know that you all had a long day, so I didn't really want to take up too much of your time, but I would urge you to email me or anybody on our team with questions. I'd be happy to come back if you want and get into real deep detail about construction. We are hoping to have this project online by late fourth quarter of this year. Okay, thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much. If you could stay just for a second, I think I have a question or two for you.
Sure.
I was considering just going right. Well, let's take a question or two, and then we might have an open discussion after everybody else presents. Anyone from the council? Start with the council. Seeing none, we'll go to the audience. Got Tony Delernia.
Don't you miss me, Mike, with all my questions? My question is regarding the monopile installation. Is that going to be a straight pounding into the piles? Is there going to be an excavation that's going to occur? Could you speak a little bit more to the installation of the monopile? And then I have a follow-up question regarding the acoustical devices outside of the bubble curtain. So my first question would be regarding the installation of the monopiles.
So you're correct, the monopiles will be pile driven, and the bubble curtain will go up 24 hours before pile driving occurs. And if we can actually go back to that marine spread, I think it was slide number, oh, so I'm sorry. Keep going back, slide number 3 maybe, or 4. Ah, there you go. One more. In relation to outside the bubble curtain, you can see here, and thank you for reminding me of it, you can see where we have a few diagrams of our passive acoustic monitoring that will be occurring during foundation installation.
Okay, is there any data that indicates how much of the sound escapes beyond the bubble curtain? Like the difference in the amount of sound that's captured inside the bubble curtain and outside the bubble curtain?
That's a fantastic question, and I have some really good people in mind to give you a better answer than I can. So if I could ask Kara to take that name down, and we'll get you an answer in the next day or so.
Thank you very much. Council knows how to reach me. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. Okay, Bonnie Brady, and then we'll move on to the next presenter. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Hi, Mike. Can you hear me again?
Yep.
Ms. Prince, a couple of questions. Can you tell me why Ørsted security boats were telling fishermen for the South Fork cable that there was a 2-mile exclusion zone when in fact, according to, I believe it was the COP, it was 1/2 of a mile. Is that still going on, or have those fishermen been reprimanded for that? Or security boatmen, excuse me.
So safety vessels they work for a company called Sea Services. We work with Sea Services to have vessels that provide safety for us. I believe that Sea Services did educate the fishermen, and they understood that they had given incorrect information on occasion.
Okay, just 2 more questions. Why are the security boats flying the coal rig symbol for commercial fishing when in fact they are working for Ørsted as, I guess you said, a subcontractor, when they should not be?
Yeah, you would have to ask Sea Services that question. I work for Ørsted.
Maybe, right, maybe you could pass that along, because right now, presently, they are flying the coal rig symbol for commercial fishing. And last question. What percentage of the offshore South Fork export transmission cable is armored? You said you sank the second part of that. And what part of the in federal waters is actually armored? Or
Well, an armored, do you mean covered? So it's a 138 kV cable, and the entire cable would be what we call armored, which is covered in material so that no magnetism or is that?
no, I'm referring to the mattresses, fronded mattresses, cement blocks, and or sandbags that Ørsted had used on the Block Island wind farm, and as part of the construction operation plan were supposed to have been utilized at least at the cable connections, but apparently at some other areas also.
So that's a great question. Thank you. There are 6 cable crossings. So in 6 locations, there are mattresses that have to cover those 6 cable crossings. Those mattresses are 1 foot thick, 10 feet wide, and about 12 feet long. So in 6 locations, there are mattresses. This week or early next week, the Livingstone will be doing a final survey of the length of the cable to see if any further secondary protection would be needed. But at this time, there are only 6 cable crossings. And right now, we have not covered the interconnection between Section A and Section B.
Right, but also within the notice to mariners, they noted that approximately 40 yards on either side of those existing cables would be covered. Can you explain a reason as to why that is so? That's 120 feet.
I'd have to go back and look at the language in those mariners briefings.
It's in the week 21-23. It was originally updated on the 17th of this past year. And it said that cables are already marked on the nautical chart, but that they may extend approximately 40 yards on either side of the existing cables. Thank you.
So if that's what the Mariner briefing is saying, then that would be correct. I'd have to go back and see exactly which one. Again, I don't have it in front of me, but
But the question is, if there are existing cables and you're mattressing, why would the need be to go for an additional 120 feet on either side of those existing cables?
I'd have to ask, I'd have to ask somebody who works with our geotechnical team or other cable expert as to why they would want to use more mattresses, but I'm assuming it would be in conjunction with whatever we said in our COP in regards to covering cable crossings.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Thanks. You know, if you do find some information, you can certainly pass it along through the council,
Will do.
through Chris.
Thank
and
you.
he can get it out to us. So thank you. Okay, we're going to move on. We still have a handful of presenters this afternoon. And the next one that we have is with Vineyard Wind 1. We have Travis Lowry. Travis? Your mic's on already, so whenever you're ready to go.
Great. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to give an update. So my name's Travis Lowry. I'm fishery liaison of Vineyard Wind and Vineyard Offshore. So for this presentation, I will give an update of kind of who we are, our lease areas, and then more specifically our current construction in Vineyard Wind 1 and our surveys going on in the 544 lease area, which is in the New York Bight. Next slide. So who we are, Vineyard Wind 1. So if you look on the map on the left in green, this is the site that's currently under construction. It's 50-50 split between Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners and Avangard Renewables. And then CIP is the investor, Vineyard Offshore is the developer, and they also own 522, which is east of Vineyard Wind 1, 544, which is off of Long Island. And then we just gained a lease off of California, and that will be floating wind. So this is kind of just who we are, and I can really will dive into current construction in Vineyard Wind 1. Next slide. So I'll kind of do it into two parts, what is completed and then what is currently being done. So as of right now, there will be 62 turbine locations in Vineyard Wind 1. It will power 800 megawatts, and each of the turbine locations have had scoured placed there. So there's been 2 layers of stone that is at each of the turbine locations, and the Flintstone was the vessel doing that. They have completed work, and during this job, we also have safety vessels. So the Beth Ann, Catherine Marie, Torbay, Socation, and the Jack M are all local scallop boats out of New Bedford, Massachusetts, and we hire them directly to be safety vessel boats for us. So they kind of go around the perimeter and go in rotations and kind of just hail and just let everyone know kind of the construction that's going on outside or out on the water. Next slide. What also is done, so our export cable is in 3 sections. So the map on the right, the CLBU list successfully laid that cable. So there's 2 cables going into Covell's Beach. So that has been completed, and then the Cable Enterprise completed the offshore cable section. So both of these have been successfully buried. The Tenacious 2, the Fleet King, and the Helen H were safety vessels for this portion of the work. So that has been completed, and then if we move to the next slide. What is currently going on is the midsection cable. So that is being laid, and then that will be spliced to the nearshore cable and the offshore cable. It's hoping to be completed by the end of July, and CLB ULIS is the cable installation that's doing that. We also have the Chickawaw. It's a boat out of that's off the Cape, and it's a scout boat. So really, it goes before the ULIS and make sure that it makes note of any fixed gear within the area. And then also the Angler and then Nantucket Sound were safety vessels, and they are out of Hyannis. Next slide. So currently, right now, we have the midsection cable going on, and we also have started monopile installation. So the Orion is the vessel. If you look at the chart on the right, those are the first 6 monopiles that they will be pile driving. The Orion can hold 6 at a time, and they are out on station and are currently installing the first monopiles for our project. And then after that, they are also have the transition pieces and the ESP jacket on the vessel as well for installation. The OSV Atlantic Oceanic and the North Star Navigator are both bubble curtain vessels that will be working on the project. And then the Beth Ann has been used to use passive or sound attenuation devices for the first 2 monopiles to see the noise for the first 2 monopiles. Next slide. So just to give a little background, we have been doing before-after control impact study for the Vineyard Wind 1 area. So there's been 4 surveys. We've done 3 years pre-construction. We are actually doing 1 year during construction right now, and then we will do 3 years post-construction. So some of these surveys, number 1 was the drop camera survey. So they go out in the spring and the summer, and they are looking at the Benton community. The ventless trap survey and larval survey, they go out between May and October 4 times a month, and they tow a net to look at larval distribution, and then ventless trap survey to look at crustaceans. For number 3, the trawl survey, they go out seasonally, so 4 times a year, and they drag an auto trawl net to look at the distribution of groundfish in the area. And then the acoustic monitoring of highly migratory species. It's a group effort at the bottom right map. There's attenuation devices in all of the wind farm areas, and there's a tagging project associated with that. So that's kind of just give you a background of kind of what we've done 3 years previous. We are currently doing 1 year now, and then 3 years post. Next slide. So that kind of wraps up Vineyard Wind 1, an update for the construction that's going on there. And now, since we do have the Mid-Atlantic or Vineyard Mid-Atlantic, so lease area 544, which is on the map on the right. So we are currently doing geophysical and geotechnical surveys, and we do have onboard fishery liaisons on both of the vessels. And then we also have scout vessels. The Morgan Gabriella is a boat out of Shinnecock, and the Captain Dave 3 is a head boat out of Sheepshead Bay. So this work is going on right now, and feel like it, again, mostly focused on Vineyard Wind 1 since we are under construction now, but felt it's important to mention this as well since we are in the New York Bight. Next slide. So really just to wrap it up, we have Mariner updates. So we send it weekly. So if, every Monday is Vineyard Wind, and then every Friday is Vineyard Offshore. So you can just go right to the link on the screen, or just go to our website and sign up for an update. And I feel like it's very crucial to get the information out there and communication. So any activity you'll see active Mariner updates that we have. And we're also working with a company called Quintum. So if you look at the chart on the bottom left, those are a map of the 62 turbine locations, the ESP, and then yes, and then there's the lobster gear as well on that. So if you were to go on our website on Vineyard Wind, you can download this plotter file, and it's accessible. You can put it right on your fishing plotter. It goes to about the top 10 plotters that can customize to put into the program. So I feel like, having this communication and letting the fishing industry know is crucial. So again, that kind of wraps up my talk. I think, yeah, maybe there's one slide. Yeah, so Krista Bank is Fisheries Manager, and I'm Fisheries Liaison. Yeah, I can open it up for any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much for your presentation, Travis. I'm going to limit questions at this time to council members. In the interest of time, do any council members have any questions? Michelle Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Travis, for the overview. Just one quick question. You mentioned that the FV Beth Ann would also be using sound attenuation devices. Was that correct? I just wasn't, if so.
So they are, yeah, so they are safety vessels, so they go in 8-day rotations, but they're also used to just deploy sound attenuation devices in the. Yep.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else from the council? David Stormer, you have online.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for that summary, Travis. I'm just wondering, for your ventless trap surveys, are you Are you using or going to use or exploring, are you using vertical lines or gonna maybe explore the ropeless technology?
Yeah, so we are currently using vertical lines in our area. And moving forward, in the other lease areas, I believe ropeless gear is going to be, we'll definitely be looking into it.
Yeah, it's a good opportunity for that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Dan Farnham?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually have two quick questions here. Number one, what is the size of the armored stone that you use for scouring protection?
So it comes in 2 layers, and how I was explained, it's kind of like fist size and then like head size kind of, so there's kind of there was 2 layers on each, and each of the locations takes about 0.27 acres at each of the locations for the scour protection.
Now, is that at all 62 sites for each monopile?
For each monopile, yes.
Yep, okay. One other quick question too. If there's going to be any exposed cable going to the mainland or windmill to windmill that cannot be buried and will have concrete armoring placed over it, will those areas be available to download on our plotters as fishermen also?
Yeah, so working with Quintum, we definitely will make that accessible. If you look at our Mariner updates, we do have an area, I believe it's near Spindle Rock, and that will be using protection. But yeah, we'll definitely get that information is there. We have a guard vessel out on the project right now, and yeah, we definitely will get that information out.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Head size means a little different thing for different people. You got some Fred Flintstone's heads around here. A little bit different, but thank you, Travis, for your presentation. Next, we're going to go to Mike Lewis, Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Council. I appreciate the opportunity to come here for you to give you a decent update on the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project. My name is Michael Lewis. I recently came into the Senior Project Construction Manager for Marine Affairs role, following a 20-plus year career in the Coast Guard. I'm looking forward to leveraging some of that experience here, even today. Next slide, please. So Dominion Energy was fortunate enough to secure a research lease and develop 2 pilot turbines 27 miles off of Virginia Beach, which were built and commissioned in October of 2020. These turbines gave us a great opportunity to do some longer-term research to understand the ecological impacts, as well as lessons learned regarding permitting and construction. These 2 turbines are currently operating. They're powering up to 3,000 homes in the Hampton Roads region. As far as a capacity factor, we've been operating at about 50% over the life of the project, with more than a 98% positive operational time. Next slide, please. So over the last few years, we've conducted a number of fisheries surveys. Based on those surveys, we've seen a rather robust ecological comeback on the 2 turbines, between the scour protection that is acting as an artificial reef and the monopile as an artificial reef structure. You'll see later on at the hospitality event, we have a video demonstrating exactly what it looks like over that 2-year lifespan from when we installed it to last year. And I think you'll be amazed at the difference. As it was talked about earlier, similar to other projects, we've got a scour protection layer at the base of each monopile, extending out to about 75 feet from the monopile. Next slide, please. This is currently the largest offshore wind project under development in the United States. We are looking at 176 wind turbines with a 2.6 gigawatt total capacity, powering more than 600,000 homes in the region. Building on that success of the two pilot turbines, they're going to be built spaced approximately 1 mile apart in the north-south and 0.9 miles in the east-west. We are beginning construction next spring with the first monopiles going into the ground in May of 2024. Following the monopile installation, we'll be installing transition pieces, and then finally the wind turbine generators themselves. Along with the wind turbine generators, we're also going to have 3 offshore substations that are going to be installed and more than 600 combined miles of inter-array and export cable. Those cables range in diameter from 7 inches to more than 11 inches for the export cable. Next slide, please. Current ongoing survey activities. We are currently in the UXO identification survey stage, meaning we are conducting surveys within that export cable corridor to validate a previous survey that investigated various magnetic anomalies within the export corridor and lease area. We currently have 2 vessels out conducting UXO surveys with UXO specialists on board who are verifying and confirming UXO. Following this, we will be conducting UXO disposition activities in line with regulatory and authority consultation. Starting in Q1 of 2024, we'll be looking at export cable installation, scour protection installation, as well as monopile installation following the North Atlantic right whale migration period. We are going to be limited to that May through October timeline for any type of pile driving activities or subsurface construction activities. So in addition to that, we do have a variety of marine mammal and fisheries mitigation measures in place. We'll have protected species observers on board every vessel. You know, some of the other developers talked about the bubble curtains that are going to be used, as well as passive acoustic monitoring, which are also going to be used on our project. So as you can see, we've got these installation seasons from May to October in 24, 25, and 26, with looking at commissioning in December of 2026. Next slide, please. We are currently at the early stages of our fisheries resource assessments. We are conducting resource characterization studies for black sea bass, surf clam, as well as channeled whelk. Black sea bass is going to be conducted over a 2-year period using a before and after gradient design in coordination with Virginia Institute of Marine Science and Virginia Marine Resource Commission. The Atlantic surf clam study is going to be conducted mid-June. The black sea bass study is planning to be conducted here starting in about a week. Channeled whelk, we've designed a resource characterization study. We are currently working towards gear and vessel acquisition to commence that study. In response to one of the previous questions, we're going to be using ropeless technology. Timed and acoustic releases are going to be implemented for the black sea bass survey. Next slide, please. So fisheries mitigation and compensation. We've had quite a discussion here today regarding the SIOW, fisheries compensation, things along that line. Dominion Energy is currently working with BMRC to establish a fisheries compensation plan ahead of the SIOW initiative. Dominion's committed to working alongside the 9-state initiative. However, leading up to that, we'd like to be in a place where we can adequately address that issue in the event that we initiate construction prior to that coming to fruition. Next slide, please. At this point, I'm happy to take any questions on the project.
Mike, thank you very much. Are there any members of the council with any questions for Mike regarding the presentation and the project? Dan Farnham, online.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question. Mike, does your company plan on doing the same thing that Vineyard Wind was just talking about? Having a website or a way that commercial fishermen or the general public can download the location of the individual windmills, scour protection, concrete mattresses, boulders, anything that we're going to get our mobile tending or bottom tending gear hung up on?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Right now, we've been issuing Mariner updates as we have changes to the actual operations that are going on offshore. As we continue, as we start to lay down subsea infrastructure, you will see continued communication. Some of that communication is coming through the Coast Guard's local notice to mariners, as well as the Coastal Virginia Wind website, which you can access online and sign up for updates. But as we go, those are our main communication efforts outside of engagement like this.
Yep, thank you very much. A follow-up, please, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Dan.
I think it would be really useful to have to do something along the lines of what Vineyard was talking about there. Just a way for us to get the location of anything where we can lose our gear or get hung up on, have our gear hung up on any obstruction on the bottom that's been created by the windmill companies. I mean, that would go a long ways to avoiding mitigation to begin with. And I think the Vineyard has the right idea there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I do appreciate that. You know, one of the things that I was just reminded of is that we don't have finalized approval for the locations. So once those are committed, they will be communicated out. And as you mentioned, entanglements, any area where fishermen can get gear caught up or anything along those lines, we do want to make sure that that's getting communicated appropriately.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Okay, seeing no other hands for Mike at this time, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for the update. We'll look forward to future updates from your group.
Absolutely, thank you.
Okay. All right, we have one more presenter. I'd like to welcome to the table Deirdre Bulkey with New York Bight Developer Fisheries Group. Welcome, Deirdre. It's nice to see you.
Thank you, Mike. I'm lucky to have this slot right between you and hospitality. So I will try to be brief. I appreciate the opportunity, though. Good afternoon. My name is Deirdre Bulkey. I am a fisheries manager with RWE Renewables. And I'm here today to really just introduce you to a relatively new working group that has been formed by several developers in the New York Bight region. So we just wanted to let you know about that initiative, and there's not a lot of time and energy probably left in the room for direct input, but please try to find us or follow up with us later because we'd love to hear from you. So just want to take 1 minute first. Oh, next slide. Thank you. 1 minute first to just explain who American Clean Power is. ACP is a trade association focused on advancing renewable energy industry in the United States. So it was formed in 2021, and there are over 800 land-based and offshore renewable energy companies involved in this group. So it's definitely more than just offshore wind. And it's quite nationally focused, you know, very big picture issues. And it functions under multiple subcommittees, including marine affairs and fisheries that meet regularly related to offshore wind. But as I said, it's really very high level. And so there isn't always an opportunity to focus on, you know, regional issues. So for example, I participate in the fisheries subcommittee of ACP, and there are over 50 folks that join those calls. They're held regularly. They discuss all different kinds of topics, but there isn't always space to really dig into the details that might be important for a certain region. So following that, if you'll just go to the next slide, a little over 6 months ago, a group of the kind of New York Bight region-specific developers felt that it would be really helpful and useful for our projects to improve coordination if we could kind of meet as a subgroup of that larger fisheries subcommittee more regularly and focused on topics kind of more spatially relevant for the New York Bight. So as everyone here knows, there was an auction in early 2022, and it brought a lot of new players to the region. There were a handful of offshore projects already in the New York Bight, just south of Long Island with Empire Wind and Atlantic Shores off the coast of New Jersey. But in the last year or so, there now are definitely a few more players, and that brings just more activity, more things to track, and there's a widespread desire you could see right from the BOEM leases themselves for a desire for more transparency, more coordination between the developers. So this is really what kind of brought about the desire to form this group. We're also very aware of the burdens of stakeholder participation and keeping track of all of these different projects. So we're really trying to find a balance between keeping everyone informed with information they need to know about the projects, but also trying to make it hopefully more efficient and not as overwhelming. So these are kind of the things that brought the group together. We've been meeting since January of this year. We kind of jump on the phone every 2 weeks. And, once we got past describing a goal, which I have on the slide in words, together identifying what our major mission would be as a group, and really trying to get beyond, once we got that on paper, how can we really get specific and really, do something with that. So the projects involved in this group are on the figure on the right. The newer leases are in the multicolored leases you see further offshore, and the ones that are a few years before that are highlighted in gray. So the company names specifically are on the bottom of the screen, and as I said, this is really just getting going, and we're trying to make some progress, and we do kind of share what we're discussing with the larger fisheries subcommittee. So any ideas that kind of percolate that make sense, we are trying to share that with the other developers for other regions as well. So next slide. Thanks. So what should we coordinate on? What would be the most helpful? Based on our perspective, so far, these are the 3 key topics that we felt would be really useful to have more coordinated efforts across developers across the New York Bight. The first and foremost being stakeholder outreach. And this is kind of the first place where we're focusing, how can the developers do this more efficiently and provide better, richer opportunities for input. The second one would be survey coordination. You heard a few presentations already today of multiple companies, engaged in offshore wind related surveys, and how can that information be disseminated across to many different stakeholders in a more coordinated way. So this is something that we're spending a lot of time thinking about and trying to brainstorm different approaches. And finally, also development of monitoring programs. We haven't gotten to this topic as much yet, but this is definitely on our high list of priorities as these projects continue to develop and learn from several that are further ahead, a few years ahead of ours. What are the best ways for these programs to potentially develop together and be more coordinated and potentially even standardized so that some of these data sets can be used together to help fill data gaps for the entire region. So this is a high priority for us, but what we're hoping to hear today, are these 3 things, does this make sense? Are we missing some things on the list? Do you have different suggestions for how to prioritize them and so forth? Next slide. So the specific ways we're trying to address some of those coordination topics, I have a few examples here on the screen. The first one that seemed pretty obvious to our group and things that we were hearing from stakeholders was, it's hard to track all these individual websites and stay up to date. So maybe if you could try to, put out a newsletter or some sort of periodic update across all the projects at once. So we tested that out. We brought an example. It's in your briefing book. It's kind of been termed a developer's digest. This first issue is really basic. It's just an introduction to our working group, an introduction specifically to the fisheries liaisons who are most active in engaging with the fishing industry between the developers and stakeholders. And so it's really just to get it started. If people think this is a good idea and a useful resource to have across the projects, maybe moving forward, we can do this periodically on different topics that people want to learn more about in kind of a holistic way across the region. So really open to suggestions there if you think this is something we should continue. Another thing that we thought was important was to have periodic updates like today at the council level and other relevant public meetings through different states and so forth. So we've been talking with the council staff about the best ways to do that and open to suggestions and how often that would make sense and what topics we should maybe cover regionally instead of, so many just project by project. So if that's, again, something that seems important and useful, we can keep doing that. Back to the survey topic, again, this has come up. It is, difficult. A lot of the companies are sending out great updates, but that can, get overwhelming as well. So we were also thinking about different ways to put, all the information across all the projects for this entire region in one-stop shopping, basically. And, not maybe super detailed across each project, but just one place where people would know, have a sense maybe once a quarter what's going on, in the region and what are the different vessels and activities occurring. So this is something that we're talking about doing. Would love to hear some feedback if that's helpful. We are a little challenged and not sure where to put that kind of information and where it should live. Online, for example, it is, again, this balance of not wanting people to have to go to a million different project websites. And we, again, have been working with the staff to explore maybe different ways of spaces on the Mid-Atlantic Wind page, which already has a lot of really helpful resources. Maybe there's some room there to do some of these region-wide initiatives or documents. So we're totally open to that if that makes sense. So the last two I'll just quickly touch on. We need a lot more development and discussion here, but we're hearing from various commercial and recreational vessels interested in potentially becoming involved in offshore wind support services. There's already, some vessels that are involved in various projects up and down the coast. And, we do hear from them as a group individually, and maybe there's a way to put that information together in some sort of directory with some details about the vessels and what their capacities and abilities may be and interests. But we also understand there's a lot of red tape, right? And a lot of safety protocols, and all the different developers have pretty high onboarding and safety restrictions involved in getting involved in projects. So we are beginning to think about different ways to maybe standardize some of that and get some of those things more even across the board if there's ways for vessels to meet those standards. So these are, need a lot more development, but these are the kinds of things that we're thinking about doing in a regional approach to continue to engage with fishery stakeholders and get them more involved with our projects. So any input that folks have or other suggestions that would kind of be in line with these different issues would be great. I think I just have one more slide. Thank you. So this was just to kind of trigger some discussion, but I realize it's late at this point. But if there's any initial feedback that council members have in terms of this regional approach for the developers within the New York Bight, things that you think that we really should focus on, or from your where you sit, the practices that really have worked the best in terms of getting people engaged and ways that we could do this more effectively, we'd love to hear it. There's a lot of New York Bight work group members that are here. If people want to just raise their hand a little bit. There's a bunch of folks that came. Please reach out to us, after the meeting and later today or tomorrow. Some of us will still be here. we'd love to hear any input you have to try to make this as effective as we can. That's all I had.
Okay, thanks, Deirdre. I don't know if it was your presentation, but nobody else raised their hand in the back of the room. So I know that there are a few of you around.
We know who they are.
Yeah, we know. And what I would suggest, and, for feedback purposes, as you mentioned, I hope that some of you can join us for our hospitality time after the meeting. Maybe that would be a good opportunity to get the feedback from individual folks who have thoughts on that. But let me see if anyone has any clarifying questions or informational questions that they would like to ask at this time of Deirdre. Okay. Seeing no one in the room and no one online, I appreciate you being here, as well as all the other presenters this afternoon. Thank you all for the information. I do want to invite all of you, anyone here in the room, to our hospitality event after today's meeting. And I'm going to turn to Chris. Since I wasn't here today, I'm not sure when and where that is going to take place, but I'll turn to Chris for any announcements on hospitality.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Everyone's invited. We are having hospitality this evening. It's on this floor. It's in a room called Courtney Terrace. So you go out the door, go down this hallway, take a left, and just keep walking. You'll walk right into it. And it will start as soon as we're done. So everyone's welcome. We'll see you there.
Okay, thanks, everyone. That concludes our business today. We'll recess until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. See everyone later. Thank you.